Okay, I think everybody is here now. Please take a seat if you haven't. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead. Yes, of course.
Yeah, as a kind of being a little bit of hostess here, I apologize for the people that has not yet received food, but it happens that many of you actually didn't sign up in time, so that's why. And unfortunately, people who did sign up in time are the ones who did not get the food. But we have food coming in, and it will be served to these people. So apologies for that. And I promised from the very start that we would be very cozy and crammed all this session, and I always keep my promises. So let's continue that way. Thank you, Doreen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Before we begin with session 2, I see a couple of new faces. So I would like to call upon the new faces to briefly introduce themselves, which organization they work for, and where you've heard about SuSanA and how long you've known about SuSanA. That would be interesting for us to know. So I see here the CEO.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ismail Shaiye. I'm the CEO, Water Sector Trust Fund, Kenya. And I think I'm not new to SuSanA, so I've been here for the last 3 years now. So I feel like part of the family. Thank you.
Okay. And who else?
Oh, sorry. My name is Marc-André Bunsley, and I'm working with the Swiss Development Corporation. To the mic. Yeah. Did you hear? No. So my name is Marc-André Bunsley. I'm with SDC, the Human Aid Branch.
My name is Vishwanath. I'm with the Biome Trust from Bangalore in India.
Okay. I think I see you didn't introduce yourself in the morning.
Targeting me.
Yes.
My name is Chris Turberg from Erbach, Switzerland. Since the beginning.
Hi, my name is Michael Kopak from Cevas and also with SuSanA since the beginning.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chaitali from WSSCC. I manage the monitoring and the evaluation portfolio. I'll be making a presentation very soon. Thanks.
And I'm Rosemary Nakagwa from Uganda GIZ. Not so familiar with SuSanA, but not so old again. Not so new.
Welcome.
My name is Astrid Michels. I'm with the GIZ, and I'm going to give a brief presentation on sanitation and climate change. And co-lead Working Group 3. Thank you, Cecilia.
Hi, I'm Martin Gambrill from the World Bank. And what were your questions?
Who you are.
I said that bit.
Organization and how long you've known SuSanA.
For longer than I can remember, and I don't know how I found out. Because you're everywhere, I think.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello. Oh, okay. No, but it doesn't say. Is it on? Hello, I'm Ina from Wash United.
Since when do you know SuSanA?
Since 14 years. No.
40 years.
Good afternoon. My name is Antoinette Komen from SNV. And I think I know SuSanA from 2008 in Manila, I think. I'm not sure, maybe.
Welcome. Did you introduce? Anybody else who didn't get a chance to introduce themselves?
But I was introduced. So my name is Jona Tötzk. I work with GTO, German Toilet Organization. I know SuSanA since 2015.
Okay, great. Ivan.
Okay, hello everyone. Ivan Biiza is my name from Uganda. I'll be making a presentation later on. And I've known SuSanA for 3 years now.
I think we have everybody. Great. So we shall begin now. This session is focusing on scaling up sanitation. We're very excited about this session. It has quite a number of diverse countries being represented. And I'm very honored to call upon the first presenter, Stella Warue. Welcome. Stella is the acting manager of the Urban Investment Program at the Water Sector Trust Fund. And you are involved in scaling up the UPSA program, correct? Okay, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Doreen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm supposed to be presenting on update of the UPSA program, but because my CEO is here, I'm not supposed actually to, I'm supposed to give him a chance to speak a little bit about the trust fund, and then I'll come in for the upscaling basic sanitation. Welcome, Mr. Shaiye.
Thank you so much. I think, Stella, this is your show. And because I'm here, I just thought that I should give the overall picture, just like any other CEO will do in that situation. So allow me, we can go to the next. Just to present the institutional framework or the legal framework on why we are doing what we are doing and how now we can connect the dots to what Stella is going to present. How we work in our country in Kenya, for example. Last year I was here, I talked about the law, Water Act 2016, that was being cooked by our parliamentarians. The food is ready. Now we are actually implementing the Water Act 2016. So how does it work? It actually provides, divided the country into 47 counties through our constitution. It recognizes that by saying that our ministry role will only be to do policy formulation. No other business. You come to national agencies like us, now Water Sector Trust Fund out there. Our job is now to fund the water sector in Kenya. You have the regulator, Water Service Regulatory Board, that also sets the price for all the water companies. And also Water Service Authority that they did not put here right now. It was unnecessary. And then you have the service providers down. At the bottom, the consumers. So this is how currently we are operating as a country. We come from the Water Act 2002, which informed the Water Act 2016. The jury is out there, how we are going to perform, but for now, this is what we are going to implement as a country. So let me devolve back to Water Sector Trust Fund and what we are doing with as a funding institution. So you can go to the next. So our role as a fund with a state corporation mandated to finance the water services in the country for both the underserved and the marginalized communities in the country. I always say that as a fund, Water Sector Trust Fund, that trust that you see up there, 90% of our funding comes from the donors. Hopefully that's going to change. We're negotiating with the government so that they can have 50-50 for sustainability. But the day we lose that trust, that word trust up there, I know they didn't mean it, but the day we lose that trust, we are gone as an institution. So that is why the framework that I just discussed is very important, to know how you give out money, how you follow that money, all the way up to finishing the activity. So this is our sushi menu. WSTF investment, that's why I don't call it project, it's an investment. If you're dealing with fund, it's not project anymore. Project is so abstract. But if you call it an investment, you feel like, that's my money in my account. So that is why we call it investment. So in every investment here, rural, we do both water infrastructure and sanitation, and also water resource. From the water resource aspect, I mean, if you open a tap, follow the top to the tap. So we make sure that we invest in all that stream. So in urban, and that's where Stella will come in to present to you UPSAP as one of the activities that we are doing, is also has both water supply going to the last mile in urban areas, but also sanitation. Water resource, and we are going to change this because of the issue of climate change right now and how it's affecting the water sector. So we're looking at how we can incorporate climate change lens into our water resource. This is now where we are moving as a country, result-based financing. We have over 110 water service providers, water companies, or water utilities, you'll call them. If you have a good credit and you know that you can take a loan from a bank, I will give you, as trust fund, a subsidy. So for the first time in Africa, we gave a water company 89 million. They came up with a bankable proposal, a bankable project. We gave them the money, I think it was 89 million, that they were funded by a bank. They only used 78. And when I asked the MD of the water company, how come you did not finish the whole 89 million? He said it was a loan. That tells you, that is where we need to go as a country. And I think we are going very far with it. We can see the results already, and that's why we are expanding right now. We are working with the Dutch government. We are coming up with the Kenya Water Pool Fund, where we are asking Kenyans to raise bonds for water. And actually, the government of Kenya has already put in 500 million. And we can see the promise of achieving that goal. So with that, I don't want to, that's now the overall picture of the trust fund and the Kenyan government at large from the water sector. I will come back to my sushi menu of urban investment. Last year when I was here, we presented, myself and Doreen, we presented about UPSUP. And allow me now to ask my manager, who is the acting manager for urban, to present where we are with UPSUP, because it is our Vision 30, one of our Vision 30 flagship project. Karibu, Stella. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CEO. I'm going to proceed with the UPSUP presentation. And I'm sure many of you are wondering what UPSUP, especially the new people to SuSanA, they are wondering what UPSUP means. And it means upscaling basic sanitation for the urban poor. And the objective of UPSUP is to improve the living conditions by offering sustainable sanitation to the residents of low-income areas in Kenya, who are about we have 2,000 low-income areas in Kenya. So those are the areas that we have to deal with in the UPSUP program. The UPSUP program is a 7-year program that began in 2011 and is currently continuing until next year. And we have been given 16.9 million US dollars, which is coming from the Gate Foundation and also from the German ministry through the KfW, or the German bank. It's financed through the Water Sector Trust Fund, like our CEO said. We are given the money, and then we work with the water services providers or the utilities to be able to implement the project. The program actually works through the having the whole sanitation value chain, where we have to do the capturing of the waste, the emptying, the transportation, the treatment, and the reuse or the disposal of waste. Right now, we are going to show you a short video which is showing how UPSUP is working. It will show you the pictures of what we are already doing as the fund. And after that, we'll have some questions.
Kenya has a population of approximately 46 million people, with an urban population of 25% and an annual urban growth of 4.2%. From this urban population, 33% still live below the poverty line. Investment in network infrastructure is failing to keep up with the growing demand in urban areas, generating a large sanitation infrastructure and services deficit. Pit latrines and septic tanks are often constructed below standards. Connection rates to sewers is low, therefore removal of the fecal sludge is to be done mechanically through the service of a private vacuum tanker. However, households in low-income areas often have to resort to unregulated manual emptying. Since treatment facilities are scarce, the fecal sludge usually ends up in rivers, lakes, or bushes. The Constitution of Kenya 2010 lays down the framework for development of the sanitation sector, which guarantee the right of every person to reasonable standards of sanitation and a clean and healthy environment. This is put into practice through a strong institutional structure where mandates and responsibilities are clearly defined. Policy formulation and regulation are addressed at a national level, whereas service provision is handled by the counties through regulated water utilities called water service providers. The Water Sector Trust Fund is a state corporation which supports the water service providers by financing the development and management of water and sanitation services in the underserved areas.
We have a growing population, urban dwellers that has a bigger population and is growing very fast. The role that trust fund plays is to look at those areas and make sure that as we are growing on the other side, we also don't leave behind these areas.
The Water Sector Trust Fund initiated a nationwide intervention to improve access to household sanitation in low-income urban areas through a program called ABSUP, Upscaling Basic Sanitation for the Urban Poor. The program is based on a scaling up approach and covers the entire sanitation service chain from toilet to treatment. This is how the ABSUP concept operates. Through effective social marketing from the water service provider, residents of low-income areas are encouraged to invest in sanitation by funding the construction of their own improved toilet and septic tank. When the toilet is completed, the staff from the water utility inspects the infrastructure to ensure that it complies with the required construction standards. Once it has been approved, the owner of the toilet receives from the water utility a post-construction incentive which represents approximately 50% of the construction cost. Toilet receives from the water utility a post.
IT support, please.
The water utility a post-construction incentive which represents approximately 50%. When the toilet is completed, the staff from the water utility post-construction incentive which represents approximately 50% of the construction cost.
Yes, but I think it's better to go here.
So you can explain from the toilets. It's a shame. You don't have another.
Use your time.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I'll just continue. And we are currently building the household toilets where we give the funds to the water service providers, and then they identify the landlords who are supposed to build these toilets. And for the subsidy, actually the post-implementation incentive, we give it after they have already built the toilet. They have to show that they have built this toilet according to the standards, so that we are able to give them the subsidy that meets part of the money that you're supposed to raise for the toilets. Then after that, we also have the decentralized treatment facilities. This is where they're supposed to take the waste from the toilets for treatment. And currently we have 13 decentralized treatment facilities, and we are hoping that we're going to upscale this countrywide. The program is already countrywide, but we've not reached all the counties in Kenya. We have 47 counties, but currently for the decentralized treatment facilities, we're only doing them in 13 counties. And we are hoping that with time, and also with the availability of funds, we'll be able to do all the DTFs within the counties. We have also the social animators who are supposed to actually help us market the program and also talk to the landlords about the ABSUP program, who are actually employed by the water services providers. Then currently the ones that are working and operational, we have 7 of them out of the 13. So the other 6 are actually ongoing. I think that's the end of my presentation. Any question?
Thank you.
Yes. We also have a case study that we'll be doing on Monday, and on Wednesday.
The case study is it's this. We can distribute it. It's this.
Yes, thank you for the correction. We have a case study that we have, and we can actually distribute. We have them at our booth that is in number 43, just near the SuSanA booth at the Stockholm Water Week. And then we're also having a showcase where we are unraveling the Magic Cube, which is the one that is here. And we are doing this on Monday at 14 hours to 15:30, room NL 353. We are also having a seminar on the smart solutions in water and waste management for livable cities, reuse, oriented fecal sludge management in Kenya. This will happen on Wednesday at 11 to 12:30, room FH202. You are all welcome. I will be able to tell you more about the upscaling of the basic sanitation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Stella. And concerning the little video, we will try to figure it out and fix it. And maybe during the break, some of you who are interested can come back to the room and finish the video. So now just 2 questions. Okay.
Thank you very much for the update. This is Trevor from Border. A quick question regarding the implementation numbers. You said that you are aiming at 400,000 people or beneficiaries by the end of 2018. Last year, I seem to remember you were about 70,000. So any update on those numbers? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just directly also my question. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and experiences. My question is regarding the beneficiaries. Which part of the beneficiaries are very the poorest part of the populations? Because we know that for the poorest, it's always difficult to pre-finance an investment.
Okay, maybe I can begin with those 2 questions. The first one about the beneficiaries. At the moment, we have 122,000 people who have been reached. And it's good to mention that initially when we were beginning the program, we had some challenges. Before it could pick up, we really actually had to do a lot of marketing. And right now it has actually picked up, and we are hoping by the end of 2018, we will have already reached the 400,000. Then about the reaching of the poor of the poor, actually here we have a website that is called the Magidata, where we were able to map all the low income areas within Kenya. And we have actually used the water utilities to be able to venture into these low income areas, which are already known because they're already mapped up in Magidata. And actually you can visit the Magidata to be able to see them. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much again to the Kenya team for this very interesting presentation. I think we'll just go ahead to the second presentation. We still remain in East Africa. Prit and Ivan will be presenting to us. Ivan is the economist with the Water and Environmental Sector Liaison Department of the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. And Prit is an independent consultant working in the field of urban sanitation planning. I believe you all know him. So I'd like to welcome you, and please.
Thank
the
you.
floor is yours.
Thank you, Doreen. Good afternoon, everyone. Ivan and I will share this presentation partly. Just to give you a very brief understanding, we have a lot of information there, and it's unfortunate that time is short, so I've put all the unwanted slides down. So if you have any questions and I'm not able to give you a clear picture of what we are doing, please get back to me after the session, and I'm happy to explain more things to you. As in any other small town, the situation in Uganda is quite similar to the other East African countries. We have an institutional fragmentation, both at the national as well as the local level, unclear mandates and weak coordination between actors, local governments, ministries, utilities. Cost of toilets, and especially in small towns, is unreasonably high, and this is what we realized. You have a range of between 500 USD to 1,300, and it even goes higher. And there are certain reasons, market and non-market barriers for this cost of toilets to be so high, but I will not be discussing, not be going into details with that. Picking on Christoph's idea on income levels, what we realize is almost 60% of the population have an income range of $0.50 to $1.25 a day. And this is the major population we are talking about. I'm not talking about bigger towns. We are talking about towns which are smaller, 15, a range of, say, 10 to 50,000. That's the range we are talking. And the problems and complexities are even much higher than in a larger town. So this is the range of income what we are talking about in these towns. As in any other case, unlined pits are a big, big issue. Small towns are growing very rapidly. The population growth rate is anything between 3 and 5%. And there are issues related to lack of land, of sinking new pits and so on and so forth, but also groundwater pollution. FSM market is non-existing, partly because emptyable sanitation systems don't exist. I have a landscape that I have shifted down, but if you want to know and have an idea about what a small town sanitation landscape looks like, I can explain that later on. So the non-emptyable toilets are almost 80 to 85% of the technology that exists in a small town in Uganda. So a bit on the background of what we've done. It was a town sanitation planning project, mostly evolved around developing capacities of town councils. It was a project by GIZ and USAID, co-funded together. And the whole aim was making town sanitation planning as a basis for improving coordination and prioritizing investments in small towns. We chose 6 small towns, small to medium towns in northern Uganda. And the whole idea was to get the local stakeholders, the ministry involved in developing the town sanitation plan. So it was not a consultant-driven master plan, but rather a strategic plan, which was a bit more participatory and inclusive. The project started in 2014, will end in 2017, September. So it's work in progress, and this is what we are presenting. So the upscaling strategy, we realized that the town sanitation planning as such in 6 towns worked quite well. We had some successes, we had some challenges, but we tried to move ahead with that and come up with an upscaling strategy for developing town sanitation plans at a national level. And obviously just making town sanitation plans is not going to help. You need financing attached to that. And so we split that up into 2. So part A is the strategy for upscaling town sanitation planning in Uganda, and B is the financing. So we have very good knowledge on and piloting about the part A, but part B we haven't done so far. And this is still a concept phase that is still with the ministry, and we're discussing different options. Part A was basically WSTF, that's the Water and Sanitation Development Facility. It's the implementing wing of the Ministry of Water and Environment. And they spearhead and institutionalize the town sanitation approach within their structure. That was the first thing that we proposed. Make it mandatory to have town sanitation plans for access to investment, not only in the sanitation, but the water and sanitation sector. So if you have a water supply scheme, it has to have a sanitation component, otherwise it doesn't get funded. Building internal capacities of the ministry to propagate the approach is what we identified, and also building capacities of external agencies like town councils, local consultants, local masons, XYZ is also a part of this TSP development program. In general, this is the entire process of upscaling town sanitation planning at a national level. We identified couple of processes that are required to do so. I will not get into the details because I'm short on time, but in generally, we have the steering processes and the auxiliary processes as well as the core process in between. What I want to highlight is we have put it up into different phases. So the first phase, we wanted to develop 21 TSPs or 20. We have 4 regional water and sanitation development facilities. Each of them take 5. Pilot them, learn from it, and then go on for the 91 and 177 in the second and third phase. Yeah, as I said, and after that is done, we go in for the implementation of the town sanitation plans in selected towns. That is more or less the approach we have. Now, part B of the financing strategy. As I said, there is a need to promote lined pits for safe containment and to support fecal sludge management in small towns. 70% of the population in urban areas need financial support to improve the situation. And obviously, the need for subsidy comes in because of low income groups that exist. And to complete the entire sanitation chain, we also require funding for emptying and fecal sludge management facilities. Now, just looking at the households, our idea around the whole financing bit was the household builds just the superstructure part of it, or either self-financed, or if possible via loans. The superstructure can vary according to their affordability, so we identified 3 different types of superstructures that they could go for, and the cost will vary between USD 100 and 250, which is at an interest rate of 2% per month. They will take 3 years to repay that loan for the superstructure. And they would work closely with MFIs and SACCOs. SACCOs is a organization that provides loans, small loans for sanitation and other agricultural products in Uganda. And what we realized that we wanted a state subsidy for the substructure to make the containment as a contained system underneath. And the next slide shows more or less what I mean. So if that is the toilet, a pit latrine, the one below is actually the substructure that is subsidized by the state. That's 1.5 million Uganda shillings. And the top of it is the superstructure. You have 3 different designs, and that would vary according to the affordability of the households. So this is more or less our basic principle behind it. Strategy for pit emptying services and sludge drying bed. We are thinking of a clustered approach because the economies of scale are not there in small towns. So if you consider a range of, say, 50 to 60 kilometers, you can have, the idea is to have one fecal sludge management system for a cluster of 5 to 6 towns. And the entire cost of this comes to around USD 250,000, including 3 cesspool trucks and a 2.6 acre land for the sludge drying bed. The capex, of course, has to be funded by the ministry and donors. And if you consider the entire chain, $60 is the cost per capita to have a functioning fecal sludge management system, just cutting across the superstructure of the toilet. So this is the figure that we come across, $60. What it basically means is we worked with 6 towns. And if you consider the cost of the toilet, including the capex for emptying as well as treatment, the entire amount for 60,000 people comes to $3.5 million for 60,000 people. And this is a fraction of what we spend on sewage systems. And in general, this is what we realized, that with just $3.5 million, we could hit 60,000 people with proper functioning FSM. I won't go into the details. I see Doreen is making big eyes at me, but this is generally the entire strategy put in a nutshell in a diagram. This is the town sanitation plan that more or less defines the boundaries and different actions and coordination mechanisms that we need. This is the sanitation chain. We look at MFIs and SACCOs to provide 70% subsidy and 30% loan for the superstructure, which is then provided to the private enterprise under a sanitation marketing campaign. They build the toilets. The superstructure is repaid 30% of the loan by the households, and the entire service after that is actually based on a fee. And this is, of course, given down to as a grant for the emptying as well as the treatment system. I'm sorry, I can't go into the details now, but the presentations are there, and you can ask me more questions if you want to later on. This is the last slide, one slide for Ivan, and then we are done. The operational cost expenditures. We realize that currently the private sector charges USD 12 for emptying services annually. So if you have an emptying cycle of 5 years, that becomes $60 for a household, which is quite high for a low-income household. What we realized is if you combine the emptying and treatment systems together and is state-run, the cost will come down to USD $6, not 5. So it's half the price. Yeah, it becomes half the price. And this is the operational expenditures for running the treatment system for small towns, considering a population of 60,000 with 4 or 5 towns together. Of course, we have challenges and weaknesses, and I would like Ivan to highlight a few.
Okay, thank you very much, Prit. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, once again. Like Prit has said it all, but what we've realized from the approach that we have quite a number of challenges. To start with, we are saying the strategy does not consider financial consideration for software intervention, and this is supposed to rely only on local government to support this. Earlier on, like Prit was explaining, our institutional structure, we have the national and the local government level or whatever. So we are saying that the financial consideration for software to complete the sanitation chain, we need to have, we are relying on only the local governments, and whereby we are not very assured of the financial power for them to continue with what we plan. So we might have a gap there after developing the infrastructure, then the software might be lacking. Our second challenge we're clearly noting is that, excuse me, the approaches for targeting subsidies to the deserving population is to be as established as yet. What we are saying is that the government is still in the process of figuring out how best can we subsidize. The approach is clear that the households have to pre-finance either by loans and a certain percentage. But when we get into the subsidy, we are looking so much at the financial strength on how to empower the whole subsidization of the sanitation development and all. What is happening is that, like Prit has highlighted, with our pilot in the 6 towns, we've done the plans, but then it is not complete. We need to go on with the implementation of these plans. And the key challenge we have here is identifying how we're going to handle the subsidy, because the subsidy is the biggest percentage, 70%, since the pre-financing from the household is only 30%. So we still have a gap here, and we really need to brainstorm on how we're going to come up with that. Maybe the other one is, at the moment, we're saying that the strategy is going to rely purely on state-run agencies, whereby we're looking at the loan agencies, like you said, the microfinance and the SACCOs and all. These are all going to be state-run. And that brings us back again to another drawing board, because now we have to go ahead and establish a clear relationship with those institutions. They are already in place, but then we want to use them to also facilitate the whole pre-financing of this strategy. Basically, this is what we've come up with as the key challenges we are noting so far. And this is mainly as at the stage we are of town, of the plans, of the town sanitation plans, but we've not yet gone into the implementation, and we are sure there will be quite a number of other challenges when we pilot the implementation. But as of now, that is as far as we've gone. And like he said, the implementation is still at the concept stage. It is being discussed by government, but we still need a lot of support to go into the implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, that's as how much we can go for now. Thank you for listening.
Informing us about the upscaling strategy of the ministry in Uganda. Can I take about 2 questions from the audience? I start here.
Yes, I have a question. Last week we passed the mark of 1 million refugees from South Sudan in northern Uganda. Are you going to use this opportunity to try to break down the cost of fecal sludge treatment, because you could extend the service to these people as well, and this may reduce the cost for the local population?
We have written a concept note for that. Yeah.
Oh,
Will
okay.
it fly?
Don't know, depends on the donors.
All right, let me very quickly ask questions. I'm looking at the town sanitation planning and the motivation around that. And I have 2 questions. One is, now you establish the model in which towns only get investment once they make a town sanitation plan. And we did that in Indonesia, and what happened is that town or municipalities started to say, all right, we need to jump through this hoop and then we get money. So from the initial pilot, which was very, very good reflection, the planning then became a sort of tick the box exercise. Or let's put something, oh, you want something, and you, and you, and you, and then, so you all agree because everybody has something in it, right? Yes, let's send it. So how are you going to ensure at scale that you don't dishearten that? And my other question is, you are going to come up with treatment plans for 5 towns. How are you going to find those other towns with whom they're going to make a treatment plan together in their plan?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
They're making a plan by town, right?
Yes.
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 But the investment and the system is going to work for 5 towns.
Yeah.
Who is going to decide how that works and with whom? Because that's
Well,
not in the plan, clearly.
We have had I'll start with the second question. We have had a very interesting experience with that. The big challenge there is buying land, and land in Uganda is very expensive, especially when you want to put a treatment plant. And you know that a donor agency is coming, the land value triples or goes 5 times high. So what the local governments did is they chipped in money from their local budget to buy that land, and they decided a central area which has good access roads to all the 4 towns. And they chipped in money, they made a memorandum of agreement, and one of the towns has agreed to buy the land for them, and they have invested that money in that land. So it was a coordinated effort from the 6 towns chipping in money to buy the land. Did I answer the question?
No, because your planning is at town level.
Yeah.
But you want to come up with groups of 5. How do you get to the groups of 5?
The group of 5?
Yes.
You cluster the towns. It's already been
So
done.
that's already done.
Yeah. The clusters have been done, and WSP...
From the national level.
The WSP has done a very good study on clustering of towns in Uganda. So you have very good identification of which towns can be clustered together in that range of 60 kilometers. So we are following the same thing and identifying those towns. Of course, there are other problems, other political problems that come in, where political leaders from one or the other town don't want to actually mix up. Yeah, there are other problems too in that sense. But if you have to look, it will work in some cases, it will fail in some cases. We completely agree on that. It is not going to work in all the clusters at the same time. What was your first question again? Sorry.
When you're scaling up, how are you going to ensure quality? Because, sorry.
Yeah, okay. Well, I have an entire organizational structure which I have not put up here, but all these town sanitation plans will go up to the ministry for approval, and they have a certain criteria for taking that out. The ministry is involved directly via the WSTFs in building capacities of town councils for town sanitation planning. So they have a certain level of quality control right in the beginning. So it's just not that the towns are put by themselves to generate TSPs, but the ministry is actually getting involved in directing how the TSP should be done and what are the criteria for selection. Yeah, I think I can stop here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Martin Gambrill. Martin is a lead water and sanitation specialist in the World Bank's Water Global Practice and will provide us with input on the call to action paper. So I'm just going to open your presentation, Martin.
So we start. I know. Just in case. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the citywide inclusive sanitation call to action. I'm glad that Christine Moe is here of Emory University because she's one of the core partners involved in this as well. This initiated the idea of a global coalition around this about 18 months ago, when 6 organizations came together thinking and talking about inclusive sanitation for cities, those being Emory University, the World Bank, the Gates Foundation, WaterAid, University of Leeds, and Plan International. And we were looking at the issues of what does inclusive sanitation look like, who should be involved in moving this forward, and what do we know and what don't we know about sanitation for all. And it resulted in a call to action 4-pager, which I have an example of here. We'll have many more at our session on Tuesday at World Water Week. And that was subsequently endorsed and supported by a number of other organizations and individuals. So this is this shows the timeline on our thinking on this. There was a conception at the Atlanta workshop at Emory University in June of last year, which we brought together WASH and urban development partners to share experiences about citywide inclusive sanitation. That resulted in this 4-pager that I just mentioned that defines citywide inclusive sanitation, describes some of the myths that need to be busted with regard to urban sanitation, and agreed on some key principles of action. We've then started to grow this coalition, sharing with more organizations, inviting engagement, and looking, most importantly, we're trying to look for non-WASH sector counterparts engaged in urban development, which we feel is a very important ingredient for moving urban sanitation forward, which is where we are today. We want to now move forward to finalize the structure of this coalition, looking at potential different formats for it, and then move into implementation of some of the ideas that have come out of that. So a vision for healthy cities are cities in which all citizens live productive, healthy, dignified lives in an environment free from fecal contamination, in which human waste is managed to safeguard the urban environment, including water and food supplies. But we know this is a vision which is increasingly under threat as our cities struggle to cope with limited financial and human resources, rapid unplanned urbanization, which we see everywhere, and the impacts of climate change as well upon this. We've got a little video which hopefully it will work, unlike my predecessor up here.
City managers and sector experts across the world have worked hard to achieve effective urban sanitation, often with limited success. This is typically due to a set of enduring myths that we want to debunk here. Myth number 1. Solving urban sanitation is all about toilets. In fact, providing access to a toilet, a latrine, or a sewer connection is only part of the solution. The SDGs now require that human waste is conveyed, treated, or disposed of safely and sustainably. The full sanitation service chain needs to be sustainably managed. Myth number 2. People don't demand improvements in sanitation where it's deficient or absent. In fact, there is latent demand for sanitation services. What is sometimes true, however, is that low-income residents often feel unable to affect change, and they're often reluctant to openly express their demands, especially when facing uninterested politicians, land tenure limitations, and technical challenges. Myth number 3. Poor people are not willing to pay for sanitation services. In fact, poor people are willing to pay for sanitation services, and they do, even when they receive substandard services. Often the only option is to resort to an unregulated private service to periodically empty their septic tank, whereas richer areas are connected to sewer systems with subsidized or free services. Myth number 4. There isn't enough money to solve the urban sanitation problem. In fact, there are available resources, but they need to be better allocated and used more efficiently. In addition to increasing public budgets, commercial financing can be leveraged for investment opportunities, especially if public funds are used more strategically. Myth number 5. Investing in urban sanitation is not productive. In fact, sanitation investments provide demonstrated health, economic, social, and environmental benefits that are essential to turn cities into vibrant economic centers. Myth number 6. Conventional sewers and wastewater treatment are the only ways to solve the urban sanitation crisis. In fact, combining the use of on-site collection and fecal sludge treatment solutions with sewerage solutions has shown important progress. Adaptive, expandable, decentralized, and cost-effective approaches can be resilient to external shocks. Myth number 7. Sanitation produces waste that is a nuisance to be eliminated. In fact, human waste contains valuable nutrients. These can be recovered and reused as soil conditioner or fertilizer. Energy can be produced from both heat recovery and biogas combustion. Water can be recycled for industrial, agricultural, and even potable use. In summary, there is no silver bullet, no simple, single solution to urban sanitation challenges. We must develop locally relevant and innovative solutions along the sanitation service chain that put customers first and that focus as much on service management as on technology.
We also know, microphone. We know that business as usual isn't working in many places around the world with regard to urban sanitation, and that we need a shift in mindsets and practices to transform cities into clean, livable and productive places. And this is going to require political leadership and accountability, engaging all stakeholders in order to drive a coherent citywide strategy that develops sanitation for all as a human right. And we also know that engaging all stakeholders is challenging. And that, as I mentioned earlier, we want to make an effort to reach out to urban developments, the urban development fraternity who aren't necessarily in the wash sector. Influence them because they need to think about coordinating their mandates with regard to drainage, solid waste, land development and sanitation. And reaching out more to sanitation professionals so that we think about blending conventional and new solutions in innovative ways. We consider both on-site and reticulated solutions. It's not one or the other. It depends on the city. It depends on the reality. It depends in the moment, at the moment in time. That we take account of the needs and resources of customers, including the poor, and we link our sanitation solutions to the broader urban development priorities. Squaring the circle with our urban development colleagues, while recognizing the complexity of doing this, because it's not trivial to do it with these different sector players. Each city's organized in its own unique way, of course. There's no one size fits all. And political leadership and or the necessary city institutions may be lacking or may be weak. So the call to action calls on actors to work on the basis of 4 interlocking principles. I won't go into the details of this now. There'll be more on this at our session next week on Tuesday. One is on the key principle of inclusion. Some of the issues that are included in that are up there. A key principle on the whole sanitation service chain, which is great. We're hearing it so much today. We're hearing it so much generally. working in partnerships across the city, and making a contribution to a thriving urban economy and to a thriving city. So coming to the end, a number of recommendations came out of the Atlanta workshop on things that we could do as a coalition. Some of those are listed there. But we've come down with some priority actions. Firstly, in terms of organising what this coalition structure would look like. And we've got timelines and dates for these things. Crafting a foundational paper that takes the ideas of the four-pager and has a peer-reviewed foundational paper that we make a splash with. And then thinking about all the different urban sanitation planning and implementation tools that are out there. We've also got a session on tools here at Water Week on Monday as well. And there may well be other actions from that list that was that came out of the Atlanta workshop. So finally, we want the urban sanitation and urban development fraternities to get involved in this, propose additional actions that could be part of this, commit to their specific actions along with this. And as I say, you can learn more at our sessions next week. One on tools on Monday and one on the call to action itself, which all the partners will be at on Tuesday. And that's it. Thank you.
A few questions from the audience. Antoinette?
I'm sorry to ask a question again. Martin, this is about the same as you presented last year, and I'm looking for more clarity exactly what the added value of the coalition would be. Because we have SuSanA, we have the working groups of SuSanA, that talking about the whole service chain, citywide sanitation, inclusive sanitation. This is not new. What can you articulate more clearly what the added value is? Because I think we agree with the myth in this audience here, right? But apparently you've looked at the sector and you've said there's something missing. What is it really that?
So what we did at Atlanta is we invited some of the, many of the usual suspects from the WASH sector, but we also made an effort to reach out to urban development specialists, city administrators, others, to ask what is happening, why aren't we getting urban sanitation to all? Who are the actors at the city level or at the national level that aren't in our sector who can influence this and help us implement the huge challenges of the SDG for urban sanitation are the most expensive, not surprisingly, of the four subsectors. Is urban sanitation is going to take the most in terms of financial resources to get there. So what we believe is part of what should be different, because we've been talking to Arnie, we've been talking to SuSanA about this, is how do we get to the urban development professionals? Some of us have worked with them in different parts of the world, but many of us don't tend to work with them or talk with them. So it is about that. So we're talking to Cities Alliance, we're talking to 100 resilient cities. 100 resilient cities from the Rockefeller Foundation will be at our session on Tuesday. So to answer your question, Antoinette, we haven't got all the answers yet. That's what I was saying in the timeline, in terms of what this coalition will look like, how it will interface with SuSanA, which we've talked to Arnie about, absolutely working with SuSanA and the working group on cities, but going beyond that to work with the urban development and influence urban development professionals. That's very much where we're trying to emphasize and make breakthroughs with them.
My question was almost in the same direction, Martin. So let me ask you to comment on my observation. Actually, we learned earlier that SuSanA has been there where now the World Community UN with the SDG is, right? So no surprise that this is known to the people in this room. So what I was observing, being part of the knowledge exchange exercise last year, is massive effort in order to inspire those who are responsible for large budgets and build trust to go for business unusual or for sustainable solutions. Is that more or less, what we are seeing with this exercise? Or is there something I'm missing out?
I'm not sure I got the question.
There's no question. This is what I'm observing. So this effort is not presenting something new to this room, but it's putting a specific effort to influence big investment trunks to invest in more sustainable solutions. So building trust among decision makers inside the bank, World Bank, other banks, to engage and invest in more sustainable solutions. So you're more or less an actor helping the bank to take the right decisions and not replicate earlier failures.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Stefan. Thank you. Yes, urban sanitation has been done by the World Bank for probably 60 years. There's been some very good stories and there's been some less good ones, you know, but a lot of that, as Peter knows, has focused on sewers and wastewater treatment, which is part of the solution, but it's not all of the solution. So shifting the agenda within the bank is very important, and we're working hard on that at the moment to influence the urban sanitation agenda. And likewise with our government counterparts, of course, because governments actually prepare and implement World Bank projects. We don't prepare or implement them, we support them to do them. So, and it's important to be able to show them examples of where this, you know, some of the myth, I mean, we get caught up in these myths with many of our counterparts to bust the myths, but also to show experiences that have worked around the world. And of course they have to be tailored and they have to be adapted to local reality, but there are examples out there. That was the, you know, the Durban event we did in December, where we brought 26 countries together to look at different experiences from Durban and elsewhere around the world. It's that sort of approach that. So yes, I'm doing an advocacy role within the bank, but it's got to be more than that. Again, and within the bank, we're influencing urban development sectors. We have a huge urban development portfolio, and we need to talk to them more within the bank. It's an example. We need to do that globally as well. All of us need to do that more to influence the urban sanitation agenda.
Martin, hi. Just one question. From our experience, what we realized is there's one actor, the political body, is a key agency within this that influences a lot in sanitation. And if we kind of sideline them, then we are only dealing with the government or the structures, but the political body becomes extremely important while making decisions at a local level. Is it being considered here? Are you considering actually having a political, somebody representing probably the mayors of different cities within this coalition?
Yeah, I think when you look at good experiences of urban sanitation for all, there can be different drivers, and but there's often been a champion, or there's been something that's happened, but that could be in different places. It's not always a mayor, but it's a good point. It could be the mayor as well, absolutely. Or as Neil MacLeod would say, never let a good crisis go to waste, you know, and use the crises that happen in our sector, the visible ones, to move the agenda, because there is an ongoing silent crisis in urban sanitation. We don't see it all the time, but the morbidity and the mortality is happening every day, and people are living with it. It's the norm. It's only when it's labelled with cholera that we sit up and listen to it, but that's happening all the time with diarrheal, and we know that. So grab these opportunities, and depending on the situation, the city, or the country, the political champion, opportunity, leadership may differ. It may be an enlightened Minister of Finance. It may be an enlightened mayor or city planner, planning department secretary. It depends. But we got to expand our influence and make the case for why we can't afford to ignore urban sanitation with this outside of our sector as well. I think that's a very important message.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Our next presenter is Peter Hawkins. Peter is an independent consultant and will present about SFDs in the context of local realities and processes.
Hi, yeah. In fact, I kind of deviated a bit from my original theme, but they asked me to talk about SFDs, which I think in this group of people is maybe a bit redundant, because we all know very much how these things are working. So I wanted to kind of link up with what Martin was saying about inclusive citywide sanitation. And because the work and the debate that led to the initiative that Martin's just been talking about was also exactly the same work and thinking that led to the production of the SFD, which is just a way of kind of looking at citywide inclusive sanitation in another perhaps more technical way. And I thought it'd be good to kind of just refocus, go back a bit, forget about the sort of tools aspect of this, but think about what does it really mean? And it means about dealing with density. Why? Because density is all about people being on top of each other and therefore transmitting their germs to each other. Moving around, you know, people coming out, working in restaurants, in markets, inside people's houses. Movement of goods which contaminated, you know, nice produce that's sprinkled with sewage water in the markets, and so on. And then sanitation, which doesn't work very well in these very crowded environments. The disease transmission, it's, you know, one of the big things is, apart from the cholera outbreaks, is stunting, which has huge general effects on people's well-being and lives. There's good evidence about this. You know, the effect of sanitation is about 3 times as powerful in urban areas as it is in rural. And that's, I think, something that we shouldn't forget when we're advocating with our politicians. You get a lot more bang for your buck with sanitation in urban areas. Some of the linkages, again, we're all very familiar with the service chain idea. Physically, you know, there are all sorts of different routes that this contamination is taken through dirty toilets, through unsafe emptying practices, through discharges into the drainage system, through overflowing pumping stations, and so on. There are transmission routes through the water supply when we're getting into groundwater, maybe lack of water for personal hygiene. And then this all kind of links up with the other urban services, which again, Martin mentioned just now. We can't be looking at sanitation just by itself, because apart from the sewers and drains, we have solid waste management. Blocking the drains, we have land use, which, you know, uncontrolled land use, which means there's not enough space, and the drainage and all the other services don't work. So we need to look at this holistically to get these linkages clear. Again, this is all very straightforward. I've just included this bottom line because this is something which is coming up. There's more and more discussion because in certain situations it may be that container-based sanitation is a third kind of string to our bow. And as time goes on, you know, this this diagram is probably going to get bigger and bigger as we realize that there are more and more ways of dealing with sanitation. And that we shouldn't restrict ourselves to given solutions. We should be, as Martin says, solving problems. So that's when, you know, we were struggling around with these ideas and we came up with the SFD just as a way of saying, okay, what actually happens in practice? How are all these things interacting in a very simple and honestly very crude way? You know, we shouldn't pretend that this is a highly technical thing. It's not. It's a story. We're telling a story. And this allows us to see in a very kind of broad brush way what is that story. And we need to poke beneath the surface. This one, I think some of you may have seen before. You know, if we look at Lima in Peru, we think, oh, there's an issue there with the sewage system, if you take the city as a whole. But if you take the 10% that are living in the unplanned suburbs, there's a completely different situation going on there, where you've got these really very poor quality pit latrines, which are causing massive local pollution. Another example, perhaps in the opposite direction, in Maputo, if you look at the informal settlements, and the diagram for the whole city looks very much like this because most of the city is made up of informal settlements. We see we have a big issue around desludging, fecal sludge management. But if we focus in on the central business district, they have a sewage system, but it doesn't work. And there's a specific problem to be sorted there. So again, you know, it's not one solution fits everything in the city. We need to really look down inside and see where we need to act in different places. Now, the experience with using SFDs is firstly that it's been a wonderful tool for getting decision makers to move. You can present this to somebody, and in 5 minutes they get it. I mean, Bill Gates presented one to Prime Minister Modi in India, and he got it. And all the way on down from there. And then once you get that discussion going, then you can start saying, so who's responsible for which? And start looking at this basically institutional breakdown that's led us to have this very defective sanitation. And then start to agree, okay, how are we going to tackle this? And so this is the way that it seems to have been working in practice, and it seems to be quite useful and constructive. This is actually taken from the Indonesian National Sanitation Plan. Some of you, again, may have seen this before, but very much emphasizing that if we start to think not about how are we going to get everybody sewered, but, you know, what mix. We've got a mix right now. You know, we've got horrible things like open defecation going on there at the bottom, but it's part of the mix. So how do we move that mix? And it's a dynamic mix changing all the time. And we need to look at each of those elements in the mix and decide what we're going to do with it. And I think it's a much more effective planning tool and a much more effective way of thinking about how we move forward with sanitation. So looking at how it changes over time and how it changes in the different parts of the city or the cities so again, just looking at the way this seems to have worked, very often what we find is initially an SFD can be drawn up by concerned professionals who are interested. That, as I've said, becomes a very powerful advocacy tool. And then you could very often go around kind of have a second attempt, not attempt, a second cut. You can do something really very simple and quick here and sort of get the main issues out. Then you can go back and perhaps do some more detailed work on the ground, which really allows you to do the sort of assessment on which you can then base an intervention strategy. What we're also finding is because a lot of the solutions are still undeveloped, we're still working on decent ways of doing this. People like WhatsApp and Water for People and various others, I mean, too numerous to mention, have been developing solutions, sort of sticking their necks out where the larger funding agencies find that difficult. And definitely it's a very productive kind of partnership. And then hopefully once we get the decision makers and the financiers mobilized and we have the technical solutions, we can get to the interventions we want. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to jump in for Doreen now. Take 2 questions. Is that okay?
I'm at your disposal.
Any questions for Peter? Oh, so it was
struck down. Brilliant.
Yeah,
okay.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very clear. All right. Going on to the next presentation. Thank you, Peter. We have our colleagues from Zambia who are going to present Lusaka's experience on integrating on-site sanitation into service delivery, the interface between on-site and off-site sanitation. I have the pleasure of inviting Nyonge Phiri, right? Right. Nyonge is going to present he will present an outline of the elements contained on on-site sanitation systems strategy of the Lusaka Water and Sewerage Company. Trevor does not need any introduction, I'm sure. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nyonge Phiri. I'm presenting on behalf of Lusaka Water and Surridge. I'll be talking about integration of on-site sanitation into service provision in the city of Lusaka. So Lusaka Water and Surridge is a commercial utility charged with the responsibility of providing water and sanitation services to the province of Lusaka in Zambia. It was established as a company in 1988 and started its operations in 1990. The utility covers the entire province of Lusaka, but in this case, I will discuss the situation in the city of Lusaka. Sometime in January 2016, Lusaka Water and Sewerage did a rapid assessment of the sanitation situation in Lusaka. And it came to our attention that we actually found that only about 90% of the city is not serviced by sewers. We only have about 9% of the city serviced by sewers. And the rest of the city is serviced by different types of on-site sanitation. Now, the thing that strikes most about that is that when it comes to sanitation, we concentrated so much on sewers, and yet that only serves about 9% of the population. So from that, we realized that we needed to adopt a solution that takes into consideration different kinds of sanitation with a good mix of each one of these depending on the situation. Next slide. Yep. So out of that, we have leveraged what we're calling the Lusaka Sanitation Program, which is a program financed by the World Bank, African Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and the German Development Bank. And other, of course, players that like GIZ and WSTF that have supported us, as well as the government of the Republic of Zambia. Now, leveraging these finances, what we have done is we are trying to make use of this program to change the thinking and also to change the way we are practicing our sanitation service provision. Part of the components that form up the program improvements on sewage sanitation, which I already mentioned is covering 9% of the population. And then we're doing something about on-site sanitation, and then there's a component on institutional strengthening. But I will speak more on the on-site sanitation component. Thank you. The objective of the on-site sanitation component is to improve. We have 5 objectives that we have identified. The first one being to improve the quality of service at an affordable level, and of course to make the price regulated and predictable. The second objective is to enhance accountability and service monitoring. This is in terms of quality of service that we provide to the public. The third objective is to maximize incentives for expansion of emptying services currently in unserviced areas. While we have not been active in this area as Lusaka Water, what we have seen is a growth of the private sector. So by nature, the private sector will only work in areas where they consider that they will make a profit. So what we want to do is extend this service even to areas that have been ignored by the private sector. Another one of our objectives is, of course, to test new innovative partnerships with the private sector who are already working in the sector. So we'd like to leverage their presence and make them partners, but under a regulated environment. Of course, the final objective is enhancement of resource recovery at different stages of the sanitation chain. Part of the reason why on-site sanitation has not been very attractive in the past is that it's not been presented in a way that shows that it can be financially sustainable. So the utilities have been hesitant to go into that because, of course, it's looked at as something that will milk other areas of the utility. So what we are trying to do now is come up with a system that will work and will be financially sustainable. This will make it much more attractive to the service provision utility. So what is the plan? As regards private operators, who I have already mentioned would like to continue working with, we would like to divide the city. We are actually dividing the city into different service areas. The one aspect of that the service areas should have is we're looking at the aspect of sustainability. We do not want a service area that will have a mix of the population that will be shunned by operators. So we would want to have these areas as viable as possible. And then the private sector operators who apply to operate these zones, these service areas, they will of course present business proposals that include emptying of septic tanks as well as emptying of pit latrines. We intend to provide some startup equipment and of course education on business management so that we enhance the businesses for the private operators, because we don't want to have a partner who will fold up in the process. We would like to strengthen them as businesses as well. And then we are leveraging the utilities presence around the city. We are already well distributed with our pay points and other, and the utilities are already well known. So we would like the private operators to work through Lusaka Water by way of course, payment collections, advertising, and other promotional activities. Then the private operators will be paid a commission based on the volume of waste that they deliver to the treatment facilities. Then, of course, we are helping the private operator to organize themselves into an association. And then as regards the population of the city, we realize that some of the current infrastructure that they're using is not emptyable. So we are emphasizing the need for emptyable facilities. And because of this, starting with resources available in the program, we intend to help households to improve their facilities so that they are emptyable. Because once, if they have unemptyable facilities, then the story ends there. Yeah. So we yeah. So as part of our activities, we also intend to do a lot of hygiene awareness and promotion of sanitation among the population. I would maybe let me mention something about the household facilities. We are to kick us off. We are starting with we are starting with resources available under the program. But then going forward, we have other resources that we're looking at. Like for instance, we have what we call the sanitation fund, which is 1% of every water bill is put aside as a fund for financing sanitation. So we intend to continue after the program to fund this improvement of household facilities through this fund. With that, I come to the end, and just a reminder, to some people it might be shit, but for us it's our bread and butter.
Questions? Yes, thank you very much for your presentations. One element for me is not very clear. So I understand that there are one private operators for one service area. Is it that?
That's right.
And I also understand that there are no direct financial relations between the private operators and the user, because the payment is done directly to the company.
Yes.
Is it? So I think the question is how we regulate, how we monitor the quality of the services itself, because we know that when there are direct link between the users and the employers, it's the users who do the regulations. But in this case, how do you ensure the quality of the services?
Okay.
There's another question, but you can note it down and then.
Okay.
Following up on this question, we have made in Germany, for example, either discharge to sewer or a local treatment unit mandatory. So when I hear about promotion and so on, have there been thoughts of making emptying of pits or septic tanks mandatory so that the operator can have a better business case to calculate, so that he's kind of sure once every year, something like that?
Okay, let's take these two questions.
Okay, I'll start with the question of quality of service. What we are doing is that right now they're operating purely as private businesses. But as a water utility, as a service provider, we are regulated by, we have our regulator for public utilities. So what we're doing is we're bringing the private service operators under our umbrella. We do actually sign service level guarantees with the regulator. So the service provision by these private operators, because they're going to be under contract with Lusaka Water, will be guided by the service level guarantees that we sign between ourselves and the regulator. So they will be contract bound to adhere to the conditionalities of the regulator. So in that way, we are assuring that there is quality of service. Then on mandatory emptying, yes, this is something that we're looking at. In fact, we are exploring different options. One of these options could be periodic emptying, where it would identify different areas where we see that this is feasible. Where you have maybe an extra charge on the water bill or something, then your facility is emptied periodically. So that this would work especially in the low-income areas, because then they wouldn't have to produce the whole lump sum at a go, because then they've been contributing to this kind of scheme for some time. So whenever their facility is full, we go there and do the emptying. This will also ensure that we do not tie down our private operators and leave them without business, because then their emptying would be time influenced. It would not really depend on demand from individual customers. Yeah.
All right, we're running 15 minutes late, so I think I would stop here.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call upon the next presenter, Chaitali Chattopadhyay, who is going to present a mixed method systematic review in low and middle income countries. Chaitali, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chaitali, and as I said during my introduction that I manage the monitoring and the evaluation portfolio of the Collaborative Council. This is for the first time that I'm attending the SuSanA meeting, and it's been an incredible experience. So I'm going to present some of the highlights of a systematic review that the Collaborative Council did with 3IE, the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. But before I move into the details of that systematic review, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the evidence program on sanitation and hygiene, which is EPSH. It's an ambitious program which we started in 2014 with an idea to generate evidence that could help the policymakers and the programmers to make the right decisions for programs related to sanitation and hygiene. The EPSH program has essentially 4 facets, but this is for the first time that 3IE, with the funding support from WSSCC was able to start a thematic window dedicatedly looking into the wash sector evidence. So initially, as of now, we have managed to fund and technically support 4 facets of work that includes 2 impact evaluations, 2 systematic review, 1 evaluation methodology development for the advocacy work, because we all know that advocacy, monitoring and evaluation of advocacy is a very challenging area of work. So we are almost about to publish the advocacy methodology paper also. And the last facet of the work was WSSCC's own midterm evaluation. We wanted to sort of have a whole package of work when we commissioned this particular area of work. So today I'm going to talk about the systematic review, but I also want to highlight how incredibly useful this particular program has been for the Collaborative Council. Even though we had the initial partnership with 3IE, but that brought on board a lot of other universities with the right technical skills on board. So we've got, different universities and evidence-based center that are a part of this endeavor now and have immensely contributed towards the evidence-building agenda. Moving on quickly to the main topic of presentation and discussion today, which is the systematic review, which looks into promoting hand washing and sanitation behavior change in the low and the middle income countries. The overall goal of this particular systematic review was to look into a relative analysis or a comparative analysis of what are the promotional approaches that works effectively in the low and the middle income countries. Of course, we didn't want our question to be only focused on that. We were not only interested in what works, but also quite interested to explore why it works, so that in moving forward, we could strengthen the designs of different policies and programs. So it essentially focused on 2 review questions, as is laid out here. So the first question was pretty much determined by the quantitative analysis that we did. And the second question was predominantly supported by the qualitative analysis we did. The first question looked into what is the effectiveness of different approaches for promoting hand washing and sanitation behavior, whereas the second question was essentially looking into what factors influence the successful implementation of different approaches. I want to quickly give attention to the team who has actually done this systematic review. We were quite keen to get Emmy, who is the manager for this systematic review, come and present here, but unfortunately she couldn't make it. So giving due credit to the team who has actually done this work. This team is from the Center for Evidence-Based Practice of Belgian Red Cross. Emmy led this evaluation, this systematic review. Hans and Axel from the same center supported her, and Taryn was another technical expert from the Stellenbosch University. The methodology that they deployed for this systematic review, as I said, is a mixed method approach. So they had qualitative as well as quantitative aspects to it. I must also say that they had an advisory committee supporting them throughout the process, which included WASH experts. So the methodology took into consideration studies dating from 1980s to March 2016. As some of you who are aware of the limitations of the systematic review, it's got to be revised all the time, because there is a timeline associated with it, because it's in a way a very sophisticated literature review. So it's very important to recognize the end point of this particular systematic review, which is March 2016. It looked into published as well as unpublished or grey literature, because we all know that the written scientific evidence in the sector of international development could be quite limited. So we had kept the search endeavor open to the unpublished studies also. And it looked into various promotional approaches that envisage behavior change around hand washing, use of toilets, safe fecal disposal, and the discouragement of open defecation in adults and children in the low and middle income countries. Just to give a snapshot, because I was quite taken aback when the team had presented the scope of the systematic review, and so I thought it will be interesting to just touch base on where they started from and where did they actually arrive. So if you just quickly look at the number of results that they had come up with when they did the first database search, you could see that around 23,000 of database search findings came out when they were trying to do the first level of search. Of course, then that was subjected to the screening of their title and abstracts, and then they came down to about 400 articles, which was again subjected to the study protocol reviews. For the grey literature, they came up with about 2,000 findings, which again was subjected to the title and the abstract review, drilling it down to about 121 articles for eligibility. And if you then look at the number of studies that were actually included, it's phenomenal, because they only found about 32 studies that qualified to be included in the systematic review. And additionally, there were about 28 qualitative studies that qualified to be included into the systematic review. Is it 10 minutes or 15 minutes? For discussion, okay. I'll try. As a result of the systematic review, they tried to cluster the approaches into these 4 headings. That's self-evident, I think, for most of the sector practitioners: community-based, sanitation and hygiene messaging, social marketing approaches, and other promotional approaches that were essentially based on the psychosocial theory. Now, I'm just going to highlight the key results of the systematic review. It's interesting to note that the researchers couldn't identify one promotion that could achieve all the outcomes related to hand washing, sanitation, behavior changes. However, there were several promotional elements that had their own strengths and weaknesses. The community-based promotional approach has the highest probability of achieving or improving the sanitation behavior changes around open defecation and latrine use, and may improve hand washing practices. However, it was noted that there were very limited positive results on the knowledge of key hand washing time. So that's an interesting finding. Improvements are less clear in the longer term, i.e. more than 12 months following the implementation in case of the community-based approaches. For the social marketing, again, it tends to show that there could be improvement around open defecation free related behavior and the toilet use up until 12 months following the implementation. But the effects on hand washing were not very evident. It also states that additional income generating activities are always required or are an important facilitator for the social marketing approach. The sanitation and hygiene messaging, on the other hand, said that or showed that they could only have a short-term effect on the hand washing with soap, while no effects are evident regarding sanitation. The sustainability of this approach, as in the behavior change it brings forth, was also very questionable. Other promotional approaches using a psychosocial theory such as Ranus model or IBM showed that they could show improvement for the hand washing, but no impact on the sanitation was evident, and only up to the 12 months. It's important to also note down the findings with regard to some of the enablers and the barriers. I've tried to list down. These are pretty self-evident, but it's important to take note of these enablers when we design the programs and the policies. Like I said, these are pretty evident longer-term interventions. We all know about it, but the systematic review supported that. Longer-term interventions, follow-up provisions, frequent visits by the implementers, use short communication messages, make the training material available. The implementer, as much as the implementer is a part of the community, the softer skills related to kindness, respect, and accessibility of the implementer is very important. So is important the gender element of it. And it was very clear that if you want to bring forth changes in the community, particularly addressing the sanitation and hygiene issues of women and girls, you've got to have female implementers out there. For social marketing, I've already said income generating activities tend to be quite an important determinant to for the success of the social marketing. The beneficiaries or the target group also appreciate a lot transparency regarding the cost and benefit of the endeavor that they are entering into. They would like to have more information. They would also like to know what is the possibility of access to infrastructure, availability of space, and the other enabling factor is peer sort of pressure and, you know, seeing other community members showing this similar behavior change. And these are some of the barriers with regard to the, particularly with regard to the social marketing and the hygiene messaging. I just wanted to conclude this with some of the policy programming and the research implications. So basically, one of the conclusions we can draw from the systematic review is the combination of different promotional approaches is a critical and important way to consider the sanitation and hygiene programs. As I said in the beginning, there is no one approach that could help us achieve all the outcomes at the same time, so a combination of it. Recognition of different enablers and barriers is equally important to make sure that our programs and policies are successful. One question remains quite critical and which was not answered through the systematic review, and therefore the researchers have highlighted it, that we don't have enough evidence with regard to, which is a major policy and programmatic question, with regard to the implication of financial assistance, either with one approach or with a combination of approach. So this is an area that they have recommended that should be focused upon in future for the implementation as well as for evidence gathering. And then finally, from an evidence point of view, they have highly recommended an urgent use of consistent approaches towards defining and measuring outcome. Because if we are not clear and consistent about how and what outcomes look like, we will not be able to gather evidence to show what works and what doesn't. And then just some concluding point. The systematic review is available at the Campbell Collaboration website. As some of you would know, that this is one of the mostly used social science repository for the systematic reviews based in the UK. So the Campbell Collaboration website has it. We are still working on the policy brief. Because you know that this is about a 500-page long systematic review, as you know, is the nature of systematic reviews and the impact evaluation. So we are still working on the policy brief, which will be most likely available by mid-September. It will be available in the council's website also, and we will be hugely disseminating that. And then finally, we are quite glad that Emmy will be actually hosting we will be hosting and she will be presenting at a webinar on the 24th of October from 2 to 3:30 Geneva time. We will be sending out more information about it, but this will be an opportunity to hear from Emmy, the lead researcher, and also ask and drill down into more details of the systematic review. Thank you.
You owe me a beer. I gave you 5 minutes extra. But 2 questions. Martin?
A very quick one. I'm sorry if I missed it. Was that rural and urban?
Yes, both.
Yeah, thanks very much. I was wondering, you know, all those factors that you mentioned, those behavioral factors, they're not very specific. They're not very clear what behavioral factor they target. Would have been interesting maybe to kind of link that analysis of what interventions were used to actually specific behavioral factors that are, for instance, kind of like the Ranas model kind of shows up. Because then you could have kind of seen if there's some parallel, I would say, some factors which again repeat themselves in different studies. But in this way, you know, what is the social marketing? I mean, which behavioral factors does the social marketing intervention actually target is not so evident. So it would be nice to kind of maybe use another analytical framework to then look at the studies in more detail to then understand what the underlying behavioral factors are.
Yeah, what I've tried, I think, you know, fast tracking could be a bit misleading also. The systematic review actually tries to track the specific intervention versus the behavior change that it was trying to influence, the combination of approaches vis-a-vis the changes that it was trying to bring forth. So it does that kind of in-depth analysis. It does.
Maybe one last question. Torsten?
Thorsten from Wash United. So the enabling factors that you mentioned, they were all on the intervention side. Short communication messages, type of trainers. Did you also look at kind of like success factors on the side of like how interventions were created, how you worked with users, what kind of like research you did to empathize and to find out like where your users are, what they think, what they do, how they act?
Yes, I think the last part which mentioned about users or the target groups appreciating more transparency with regard to costs and benefit, with regard to availability of infrastructure space, is the point where the perspective of the beneficiaries and the target groups were captured.
Okay.
Can I have a quick?
Sorry, we have to cut it short. We're running out of time. We're 15 minutes late. Could you please take your questions during a coffee break with Chaitali?
Which might not be there. We are running more late.
Thank you very much. It was very
Thank you for moderating. Thank you to the presenters. Maybe you all stand up. You saw the sun, but you don't get a coffee break now. Just move a bit while we're moving to the next session, which will be moderated, I think, by Stefan, if I get it right.
It's okay? All right, so good afternoon. I'm really glad that still some of you are here. And it's the good thing to be in SCI, we are far away from everything, so nothing else to do. Basically, it's a really privilege and honor to be moderating this session together with Stefan. Everybody knows Stefan from Borda.
Everyone knows Francois from Global Water Partnership.
Okay, hello. We are also, both of us, coordinating the urban theme for the World Water Forum in Borda.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so we would like to make sure that you don't forget to come. I know that some of you say these are global things. This is maybe a waste of time, too much conference, etc. But the more I've been listening to you here, the more I realize we need you. Because you guys are really talking concrete evidence. You have evidence, you have concrete activities, examples, and we need this to be shared. And some of you were saying, oh, we know that already, this is already, but many of the people don't know about it. So outside this crowd, many things are not known. So please come and we will organize to contact Stefan or myself. The next thing before we start with the next presenter is that a lot of us are now looking at different ways of packaging sanitation. We're invited to look at job creation, at income generation, not anymore the usual language that we are always talking. I don't know if you would agree with me.
Absolutely.
And so this is something which we absolutely need to look into, maybe how we package all this, and hope that you in the coming presentations will also bring this towards, because we need to talk to mayors, to people who don't know nothing about sanitation. So we need to talk the language differently maybe as well. So it's my privilege, Stefan, you're going to be starting the first moderation.
Exactly, and it's my pleasure to introduce Astrid Michels from GIZ. Astrid, we have known each other through your work in GIZ on the WACLIM project. You're going to introduce your work and maybe also your background, but it's known fact that in many countries the wastewater treatment, okay, please step inside the gray line now that the space is free. Hello everyone out there. So water utilities may contribute to energy consumption. So more wastewater treatment may actually be a negative threat to resource utilization or energy production. So this is your mandate. You have been looking into that and still do. So it's my pleasure to introduce you. The floor is yours. We expect, like earlier on, about 10 minutes of presentation and 5 minutes of question and answers. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you also for advertising my program. I'm actually not going to speak about my programs, but in general about a fact sheet and about actually the working group 3, renewable energy and climate change. This working group and what I'm going to present is actually a joint work, and I'd like to also acknowledge Kim's work and Torsten's work. So what we are trying to do is that linkage, how do we speak actually the language of the climate community? What are the linkages between climate change and sanitations? And what are the opportunities that we're seeing? The link between climate change, water and sanitations are becoming more apparent every day, because climate change, effects of climate change are mostly felt through water. We are seeing floods, droughts, rising sea levels, and extreme events more frequently. And these disasters are also leading to the destruction of our water supply and our toilets, our sanitation and wastewater infrastructure. So contaminated water is being then released into the environment and affecting human health and the environment. And it is the children and the most vulnerable groups that are mostly affected by it. And when we're looking at climate change scenarios, then the forecast is actually that the variation in space and time is going to increase significantly and leading to significant socioeconomic effects. So greenhouse gases are, and carbon dioxide is increasing at an accelerated rate because humans have started an uncontrolled experiment of burning all the carbon that has been accumulated over millions of years in less than 1 century. And we're currently 1.1 degrees higher than the average temperature in the 19th century. And if we're continuing like this, temperatures may rise up to 4 degrees Celsius. But business as usual is not an option. And all sectors have to contribute to reducing these carbon emissions, and so can the sanitation sector. Mitigation opportunities in the sanitation sector are multiples. One of them is the recovery of energy from waste. Another one is reuse of water and recovering the nutrients. So rather than, for example, producing fertilizers, we can reuse those nutrients. And ultimately, those measures also have multiple benefits, such as increasing the financial sustainability of utilities, increasing opportunities to expand service levels, greenhouse gas mitigations, and also reducing environmental impacts. However, despite all mitigation efforts, climate change is a reality. And all efforts that are being put in place right now are not sufficient to stop climate change. So it is still needed also for the sanitation sector to realize the climate risks and to reduce those risks. And what does this mean? This means at the local level that we have to change our concepts. We have to take into consideration the new hydrological conditions. And we have to establish systems that are resilient to disasters and to climate risks. And there is a number of adaptation, the potential for the sanitation sector for adaptation is huge. And here are some of those examples. We can see here on the left side the reuse of wastewater and offsetting fertilizers and nutrients. So there is a huge opportunity for new sanitation concepts, and especially for introducing circular economy approaches of reuse and recycle. And then there are also concepts of preparing for disasters, so disaster risk reduction of flood protection measures to reduce the physical risk of infrastructure, but also reducing risks of human health. Many of those approaches are actually approaches that are embedded in the water, food, and energy nexus. And those approaches are, by the way, also approaches that support mitigation, because with waste to energy approaches, we can also reduce the effects of climate change. And we, of course, also improve water security by reducing water or reusing water. So all these approaches and integrating the Sustainable Development Agenda with the Paris Agreement is key towards a low carbon, towards sustainable sanitation and towards low carbon and climate resilient water and sanitation systems. We can see here on the left side the SDGs and the linkages to different sectors, and on the right side the Paris Agreement. And a cornerstone of the Paris Agreement are actually the national determined contributions. So we have to strongly link our efforts to implement SDG 6 with those national determined contributions. And one of the things that we have to do is we have to clearly, when we link our water activities, sanitation activities with climate activities, we have to be clear in showcasing the impact. So showcasing the impact on the different sectors, what we have heard before, on the health sector and the environmental sector, economical sector, because in a way, this is all cross-cutting. And all this is going to be discussed in our paper because we want to raise the awareness on climate change actions. We want to showcase success stories. And I can show you here a brief outline. By the way, at this point, I'd also like to acknowledge the students, the Cranfield University, because they have started to work on a draft. And we have 4 sections. So we're going to have an introduction section where we're discussing the relevance of the sanitation sector in the SDG agenda, but also within the Paris Agreement. We are going to more in detail discuss sanitation and climate change interlinkages, impacts of climate change sanitations, especially with a special focus on perspectives on vulnerable groups. And then we're also discussing the opportunities, and here we're going to discuss opportunities for mitigation, opportunities for adaptation, the enabling environment, and that has to change. And we're going to provide tools and resources, planning tools in terms of baseline assessment, but also tools for GHG, quantifying, and how to access climate financing and climate funds. And in this case, I am going to advertise for my project because tomorrow at 2:30, we're actually going to launch a tool that helps utilities to quantify their GHG emissions. So please come and join us. And I also want to let you know that if you have any case studies to share, please contact us. If you have any questions, please feel free. Thank you very much.
A quick round of questions. Quick round of questions. Number 1, Claudia. Number 2 already. Please make up your mind.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm wondering, is there any experience to get funding from the big climate fund for wastewater project?
Yes.
And then, if you can give an example, that would be wonderful. And then usually this big climate fund are very much promoting centralized systems. And it's very difficult to get with decentralized systems, also an energy project, to get funding from that. So what is your experience and what is your perspective?
Well, what I can tell about this is, for example, the Green Climate Fund, they definitely have a number of projects, and there is also actually one project in Fiji where it is about wastewater, and it's a holistic approach, wastewater and water supply. Now you have to think about Fiji, and this is a small island development state, so there is also a huge focus on adaptation, but also mitigation. So I actually think that when we're looking at the Green Climate Fund and climate financing, that I think we need to think about system-wide approaches. We have to think more holistically and integrate different components. So I don't think it's going to be just a decentralized component. I think we've heard it before too, like, how can we combine flexible infrastructure, multi-purpose infrastructure? And of course it has to go ahead, hand in hand with the participation of the right stakeholders, the enabling environment, and the capacity development.
Okay, last question. And then we go for the next presentation. Chris, maybe or not really? Okay, so last time over, we tried to make up some time. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. And you're going to introduce the next speaker.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we're going to have a next speaker. Maybe I'm sure that most of you know him. If you don't know him personally, you've read a document that was carrying his name. I'm very pleased to introduce Pi Drechsel. Pi Drechsel is a strategic program leader for the rural-urban interlinkages and resource recovery and reuse at IMI. And he's been working there for quite some time, already 15 years, isn't it, Pi? At least. At least. So, Pi, you've got 10 minutes, as everyone, and you will be looking at the resource recovery and reuse.
Okay, as you like.
I don't know. Someone looked at the program and said, we need research. Somehow we have to cover the research. And then they gave me a slot that's quite general. If any one of you wants to check email, it's now a good moment, yeah? So I don't mind. Feel free. It's quite boring. I have to press or there's a remote? No, you press. I press. So very often we hear, so if you really want to bring RRR to scale, what you need is finance, an enabling environment, you need the political will. And of course, someone will then say, yeah, of course, we need also some education, because actually it's not so easy. It's in part quite complex. You have to change behavior. And very seldom you hear about research. And we could ask this, so what's actually the role of research in all this? Yeah, because we're already moving towards implementation. And now many of us here in the room, they actually work on research. They work maybe on technologies, or they work on behavior change. And there's a broad spectrum, but I think questions we always should ask us is, do we investigate the right issues? Well, sometimes maybe we're not on the spot. And is the research maybe shifting focus? We might research since 10, 20 years the same stuff. Are we still on the right things? And are we game to fit maybe the changing needs? Because also the needs are changing. And I will, during the presentation, tell you that I'm actually the wrong person to speak here. I will tell you why. So this comes. Some reflections, just from my own bias. In 10 minutes, you can't cover a topic like research. Everyone would like to hear something else from the biophysical, the technical, the social science part. Just a small overview. Do we do the right research? SDG 6.3, and substantially increasing recycling and safe reuse globally. So there are a lot of efforts now. We know how much we have a safe reuse, how much treatment we are having connected to safe reuse. How can we actually expand this area or volume of water reuse? Planning, treatment for reuse. There goes a lot of effort in, but this is actually what we should do. So what I show you here, that is, let's say, the area which is currently under planned wastewater reuse, treated wastewater. That's approximately in the world, I would say 600,000 hectares, let's say 1 million. So let's be just optimistic, say that's 1 million. And now with the SDG 6.3, let's try to maybe double it. Yeah, so let's put all our research efforts in this, that we can double it. Is this the right way? I'll show you another slide. This slide shows the area where currently wastewater is reused. It's already used, but unsafely. So this is the area where wastewater is just entering streams and then irrigated areas that are 30 million hectares worldwide. And is not maybe the more important research question how to turn this safely, because that's already there. Yeah, how to incentivize maybe farmers to adopt on-farm safety measures, which the WHO 2006 version is promoting, despite that they have a very limited risk awareness, despite that there are no tangible benefits. So it's not maybe this more important, and we would actually make more progress on 6.3 than investing in more treatment for plant reuse, hoping that there's downstream of a treatment plant, a farmer waiting. Now, when we work on resource recovery and reuse, and I bring you just some photos from our work in Ghana on co-composting. So they're all over entry points for research. It starts with here, the collection of the food waste, the organic waste for the co-composting, the fecal sludge. There's so many research questions around this. Then the composting process, and eventually the machinery for producing pellets and the best storage and how to sell it, and then actually at the farm use. So all over this whole research service chain, you have millions of interesting research questions in which we could dive and work endlessly, but are not maybe the more interesting questions those which cut across the chain. And I think that's something we should look much more at. And a typical example, which you all know, that is from the fecal sludge management, where the large variations which we find in the toilets between different geographies, between different technologies, etc., and the collection, how they are influencing the actual reuse value. So where something at one end of the chain is actually making a big impact on the value proposition you have at the other end, where the technology in between can try to buffer this. But it's one of these components where when you come from the reuse part, you actually have to work all the way through to make it working, because otherwise you have such a variation and of quality, and at the end you have to make a marketing strategy where you tell the farmer what you find in this compost is this, this and this, so much NPK. So either you enrich, but then what you get again varies. A very tricky issue. Typical example to work across the value chain. My last example is comparing scales, comparing purposes. This photo here, Chris will know that's from our work with Sandek and Nearvak. A pilot plant for co-composting more than a decade ago. And now when we change the system, when we go commercial, so that's what we just inaugurated, I think 1 or 2 months ago, totally different scale. This goes commercial, that's a private sector. We are just assisting. This is a shift in research now, a total shift in research questions. Piloting and pilot research is this playground. Yeah, we like to play, we like to test. Chris will recall the different corn sizes of the scent in the drying beds, etc. But you go commercial, you survive or you die. And there are totally different research questions. And there's now a lot of words, but that's really the slide, the most important slide, because today the questions are for us, so what kind of private partnership contracts and business models will be the most sustainable? Or what's in the local context the best mix of finance? How to reduce the transaction cost in accessing carbon credits, which for many is just impossible. How to manage the composting certification approval process. Yeah, like the World Bank, they publish guidelines. You can see in Ghana, for instance, it takes on average, I forgot now the number, but 16 months to get a new product like a compost certified. It took us with all goodwill, without bribing, with all goodwill and trying really everything, 3 years. Yeah, in 3 years, the startup will die. So these are now the key questions which we can analyze from research, and where we at the end come maybe up with something much more interesting. Yeah, you can read it yourself, but the last one, how to increase cost recovery, key question always, and when will we break even? Then the last question, or let me go back. I said I wanted to say, yeah, it's my last slide. I wanted to say why I'm not the right guy to present this. Actually, these questions should come from you. Yeah, we are a research institution, and actually I would like that here the implementers are standing, that Martin is standing here, that others are standing here, and they say, we have these gaps, we want to do something, but here's the implementation gaps, and there we are struggling, or we don't have the right technologies, or we don't know the business model, or how could we do this better, so that we can be more responsive. You should not ask me as researcher what I like to research. Yeah, we always like to research everything. But to be more demand-driven. So I would just suggest for the next time, put here the guys who are implementing, and they should formulate the research questions. The last question we should ask us is, are we actually fit for the game, or are we game? Yeah, how many engineers are here in the room? How many social scientists and economists? How many soil fertility specialists actually to answer these reuse questions? How many institutional and private-public partnership experts? How many visitors, developers, and finance experts? So there might be some crucial gaps that actually we live up to the needs. That's all. In time?
A big applause. Huh? Thanks a lot for this. And I'm very glad that you brought up actually the question of income generation, market, business, because this is what the big question is about now. Yeah. All right, some questions to Pai? Right? So okay, there's one question from Christine. Yeah.
From a researcher.
Yeah, but So, Pai, you have done a lot of work in this area and incredible work. I'm just wondering, and I agree that the research questions should come from the implementers, there needs to be the economic part of the equation, but what about the health part?
It's here like a ping pong game, yeah? There are excellent players in this field like Emory, Christine Moore, who are covering this fully. But those who work on work very close on implementation, like we are trying to do, like the whole donor community is driving us. Yes, they don't want to see any more research. They always want to see impact these days. And if we go this research for development, if we go the impact pathway, then we have to answer these other questions too. Everyone today, when we write a proposal, wants to know what are the returns on investment. Yeah, and if we write anything and say we involve the private sector, when do you break even? How long will you depend on subsidies? If we can't answer these questions, we don't progress. So that's why I just wanted to say, we might work all on our own domains, and you're completely right, health is a very important one. Safety is key for resource recovery and reuse. But there's a shift. There are many research questions coming now on which I never thought before, because now we are much more implementation driven. Of course, others might have always thought only on those. Yeah, but just to alert us.
Another question? It was really very key. Yes, yes. Is there a microphone? Okay.
It's not a question, it's more just a comment how exciting. It's really exciting that we are shifting in this field. We are shifting to these new questions about hardcore implementation and cost recovery and so on and so forth. It's a fantastic sign. It's great. I just wanted to say that.
Good. So on this positive note, we give it a good applause. Thank you. Thank you. And we hope to see you in Rio, in Brasilia. And we'll make sure that you come and give the same message. Right, so now it's your turn.
Yes, and I'm happy to introduce you to Claudia Wendland. Since 10 years working with women, now the name has changed, Engage for a Common Future. Who remembers that our common future was that Brundtland report preparing for Rio, so an organization which is really has a long standing, but we know each other longer than that. And that is linked to the work you did at Technical University of Hamburg-Harburg, working on reuse aspect with Professor Ralph Otterpohl. And we also met in Amman. So I'm happy to see people also from that region here. She has been doing her PhD there on anaerobic digestion, co-digestion. And she's going to talk to us about the importance of water and sanitation safety planning. The floor is yours.
Change the name. Before we called Women in Europe for a Common Future, so that's also where we come from. Since 25 years we started to work in Europe, and then we went further to the east, the Caucasus, Central Asia. Now we work also on a global level, and that's why we had to change the name. Otherwise people were always asking, why is this name with Europe? So that's the reason for that. And still, I want to share with you these experiences and the new Water and Sanitation Safety Plan Compendium, a handbook that we made, which is basically for Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia. So this, maybe you are thinking, what is she talking about? Europe? Europe is not Europe, so we are talking about Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, Central Asia. This is an overview showing the range of water supply systems. And people, especially working mainly in developing countries, might think, okay, that's not very typical, but that's the case in, I don't mention now the country names because country representatives are usually not very happy with that. So, but this is all in Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia. So you see here centralized water supply. Here's also with chlorination, but you see the protection zone is not really well protected. But this is more typical. So the wells, usually shallow wells, private wells or public wells that are used, and that is the typical stand in the street, just in the street. And you see also cold winters, so different climate than in typical developing countries. Cold winters, hot summers. How is it for, and that is basically water, drinking water, what is the main problem. When you go into the villages, then people are not discussing, don't want to discuss with you so much about toilets. They want drinking water in their homes. They want a job. And toilets is much of less priority. So the sanitation situation and wastewater situation looks like that. That is not so typical for rural areas, but still a lot of even smaller towns have activated sludge systems 25 years ago. They were even running that time. But then the Soviet Union broke down and then all the systems were quite deteriorated. So that is a system, photos I took quite recently. So this, you see, that is, was a good system some time ago at that time. This is the other example. This is in a country where they have 100% improved sanitation. And the kindergarten children are going out because they have a toilet, but it's simply too disgusting to go there. This is a typical school toilet, you see here. And this is a household toilet. Quite a rich family in the village that has this type of toilet. So, our experience, we work since quite a number of years in these rural communities where situation is often like in developing countries. There's a big problem that the rural population has no awareness about the linkages between health, water and sanitation. So they don't know the linkages between the pit latrine, the shallow well, and nobody takes care. I mean, the municipalities has no money, the authorities is not there, is simply not taking responsibility there. Sanitation is inadequate, and legislation usually exists. So there's a very good legislation in place for protection zones, for everything, but it's simply not put into practice. For example, the water protection zone is very simple, I mean, to realize, and not too expensive, but that's a big problem. And also then to understand what inadequate sanitation means in terms for drinking water quality and so on. So that's how we started. And we were thinking already some years ago that the water safety planning is really a very nice approach to also to use in small communities. So people who don't know this approach, it was developed by WHO. It's not looking only at the consumer's drinking water tap, but it's looking at the risk from the drinking water source up to the tap. So it's because if you only monitor here the drinking water and you get some problems there, the people have already drunk it. So that's clear, that's too late. So the risk assessment starts really here to look where are potential risks. And that is a very nice approach that can be also used in rural areas. So we started to adapt that because we were thinking it has a really good potential. Yeah, here you can see why we think it's very important, because it can support information, transparency, a better understanding of the drinking water system. There is already tools available, especially from WHO, of course, from IWA, but we realized that in the challenge is in small communities, there's no professional stuff. So there's just the population, and you have to address the population, and you have to make them understandable. I mean, it's not rocket science, all these, but these IWA tools, for example, are too complicated, simply too complicated for population in rural areas or small, if there are authorities responsible, it's too complicated. That's why we started with this simple tool, and we started actually to work with children, because in even the single small villages, there are schools. And so we addressed the schools and made a manual with the whole steps. Had quite good results, but we saw that they are not looking at the sanitation part. So we started with water safety planning, but then we realized the pit latrines are a very big issue. And of course, within the water safety planning, you have to look at toilets also, but people don't know because they only look at drinking water. So we included explicitly sanitation. That's why we call it water and sanitation safety planning. And it is so important. Here I give you data for Romania, which is an EU country. It's a little bit outdated already, but in 2009, there were almost 1 million children infected by soil-transmitted helminths, which is considered as a typical tropical developing countries disease. So that's why we further advanced this this work. We had made some experiences with this first brochure that we made and this first approach in small communities. We included sanitation, and we learned from the people that they need even more background and more technical support. So we have now this 3-part compendium. Part A is really how to do such a planning stepwise in 10 steps. The second one is just background information about technical systems for teachers, for authorities, for NGOs, for professionals. And the third part is then how to involve schools. So if you want to involve schools, not necessarily needs to be done, but then there's explicitly some modules how to do that and how to work with them. So that was now translated into 5 languages. And we do that now in 3 countries in Eastern Europe. So what are the results? I know this is the structure again. I talked about the 10 steps. So everybody who's is interested can approach me, and I have also some USB sticks with the planning. So this is how we did the activities with the children, for example, going to the water source, doing some water testing with nitrate tests. So the pupils really become water experts in their villages. So people brought to them water samples. They made just simple water tests. And really they got also quite some confidence on themselves. So this and this are very simple hand wash activities. Results are also very interesting. Just here I want to mention that is a shallow well, nitrate concentration. So the limit is 50 milligrams per liter, as you probably know. So we have here, for example, over time, 1 well. So, and why is this drop down here? So I'll discuss that with you in the break. Who is interested to know? We measured that, and then we really started to discuss, and why does it come? And then we could really change it, and then we could keep the level below 50 milligrams in that well. That is the mapping of wells, of sanitation systems. Usually the septic tanks are just drain pits. Okay, so we have a number of results on level of households, level of villages, and on national level. So we try really to empower the people to raise also their topics on a larger level. This is a case study a little bit more elaborated in Romania. This is an example from Moldova, where the pupils were so much mobilized that they really found funding for themselves to reconstruct a new school toilet, which is an indoor UDDT toilet. Yeah, so conclusions, we like this compendium very much. We think that it's a very useful tool, not only for schools, but also for schools, but for especially for small communities, because we see that civil society can be strengthened, population can be empowered, people understand better their problems. And yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Can I just shortly mention, I put this picture because this is now Moldova. This is a very small country in Europe that has now a national norm for construction of UDDT. So they have a national standard now signed by the Minister of Construction on construction, operation and maintenance of UDDT.
Urine diversion dry toilets.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so a round of questions quickly. Yes, Diane.
Mine's simply a compliment. You've taken science and you've made it work for people.
Thank you.
Delicious. So bravo.
Okay. Thank you, Diane. One quick question from my side. Are you only talking to school headmasters? Are you talking to mayors? Who is your primary contact?
Yeah, when we start with schools, usually the mayor or the authorities think, okay, that's an education project, so we don't care so much. It's just basically education. So now we really learned of that, so we have to address basically also the authorities in the first place, and then go also with the children.
That's a lot of work. So the part of infrastructure upgrade and the work with the community, like 10% infrastructure and 90% process consulting with the mayor?
Yeah, software. Yeah. Just
okay.
awareness
More
raising.
question and a break. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now you are. I'm handing over to Francois, who's introducing the next speaker. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Now we're going to have a very special gentleman now. Some of you might know him, Jay Bagwan. He's the executive manager of the Water Use and Waste Management of the Water Research Commission of South Africa. And I've known you, Jay, for about 5 years now. And every time you have a discussion with Jay, you are sure that you are coming back with some wonderful, new, innovative issue. And actually now, if you look at the program, did you notice the title? The title is it the same that you have here? Yeah, Ending Madness. So he's invented also sanitation psychology. So we're going to hear about this very much. Looking forward to it.
So he made me famous. I came with my glasses, with the spotlight, and I thought I'd do the Jackson and give you all a talk as like a pop star. And I'll leave that. Thank you. I got off the flight today, early in the morning, so I'm here in body, not in spirit, and a lot of coffee. So if I misrepresent myself, please apologies, but I put this as a plug-in. We have a session with the Gates Foundation at the Stockholm Water Week. It's on Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. It's about ending this madness, and I'll share with you, some of the South African experiences. So in South Africa, we've sort of scaled up sanitation, in the big way. We don't have issue. We have lots of money. We have lots of initiatives, but we're at a crux of a huge problem, okay? And I think many African cities that are going the pathway of scaling up are going to end up with the same urbanization challenge that we are in, okay? And I appreciate all the innovation around citywide and etc. All of that is needed. But, when you start coming to reality, that's in 2008, a settlement in Durban, eThekwini, if you want to know. 5 years, it looks like that, okay? And you talk about citywide sanitation. The problem is that we have a binary approach to the way we implement sanitation, okay? What I call in a binary is a gold standard and a hold standard, okay? And we've been doing it for the last 50 years. Okay, so when we get into these areas, it could be Kenya, it could be Nairobi, whatever, and we talk about citywide, we put a hole in the ground and we think we'd solve the sanitation problem, okay? And if we don't put a hole in the ground, we put waterborne. So that's the binary implementation model, where we either go conventional wastewater treatment with sewage, or we go on-site sanitation in the form of a hole in the ground, and in between there's a technology gap. Okay, and when we start talking about those circumstances, we do have a technology gap. We can't solve it. And I think that's where this madness needs to end. We need better, we need more nuanced technologies that service very different challenges we have in many of these areas. Okay, they're not the same. Kibera is not the same as Soweto, is not the same as in Southeast Asia and in India. You have to come up with a whole lot of new sanitation technologies that would service these areas. So, for me, that's what I put up about this madness. Is it a technology gap or a technology trap that we get into? Okay, and we need to start asking ourselves, because where I come from, we are in a technology trap. We have 5 million VIPs that are filling up faster than we thought, and we don't know how to deal with it. Okay, and we have a whole lot of wastewater treatment plants. Some of them are even more advanced than what you have in your backyard in Europe, that are all failing. Okay, so we have this trap that we're getting into as a country. And then this whole paradigm that a lot of poor people in developing countries aspire to, with all the marketing, is a flushing toilet. That's what they all aspire to. okay? And we cannot turn this paradigm around. And then, like I said, this whole dry sanitation concept that we keep pushing out, like what you would call M&Ms, you know, we just sort of keep giving them out because it's easy to roll out by now. So it's a lot of problems with dry sanitation, and that's why we're pushing this whole paradigm around fecal sludge management, because we're seeing this huge elephant going to start confronting us in the future. And we know all these problems. We're experiencing it in Durban and many places. Disposal is not easy. Access is not easy around dry systems. Emptying is not easy as well. You know, so those are all the realities. So I've got this research strategy. I don't have time to go into it, but we've been tackling this from a resource reuse perspective to say, let's bring some new nuances around innovation, around how we go off the grid, and how we also service a whole lot of FSM opportunities. So I'm not going to go in, I can share this with you, but there's three elements of what we improve now, what we incrementally change, and what we really disrupt. Okay, and the sanitation sector for the last 200 years hasn't been disrupted. You know, we've all only seen the front end of a white porcelain toilet changing over 200 years. The back end is where the real challenge is, and we haven't disrupted that. So what the Gates Foundation is doing, etc., giving that impetus around ending that madness that we don't need to flush. We can achieve a lot without flushing. So, you know, we started with the border stuff, and we've taken the border stuff in South Africa a little further around beneficiation. There's a whole lot of IAPS systems that we introduce where you can harvest algae. So the whole beneficiation approach is starting to change the way we approach sanitation and treatment, and looking at, you know, growing crops and biomass and organic fertilizer and all sorts of stuff that we've been doing you know, through the system around beneficiation on reducing costs and convenience, because there is no thing as low cost sanitation. You know, VIP is more expensive than a waterborne system. We've already assessed that, and we know that, okay, with all its problems. So we need to just be rational as to how we deal with these things. So I'm not going to, I don't have time. I saw that I was programmed for 3:15, so my brain started to switch off after that. But, you know, we're doing a lot, and we're investing a lot in new innovation, etc., and beneficiation from sludge. There's not one solution. We have to take new solutions as well. So there's the LADEPA process we've introduced in Durban. A lot of energy is going around creating fertilizer. And remember, when you're going to use human feces treated for agriculture and commercial agriculture or whatever, you have to have the right TKN ratios. Otherwise, it's a ton of shit in somebody's backyard and they're tilling that stuff. And it's not enjoyable. We've been down that path, you know, trying to experiment with that. So there's a lot of opportunities that we're playing around with. There's a lot of innovations coming out around what the opportunities on coal, on biochar, all those is possible. We're looking at pasteurization as options, and that looks like some of the products we're generating through the LADEPA. We looked at entrenchment of sludges as well as options, and you can see the experiments of burying and the growth is quite good. There's a whole lot of decentralized options that we're looking in more challenging situations, and then turning sludge into fuel and other byproducts are options. And then looking at you know, alternative vermiculture and hybrid processes. But the opportunity that arises amongst all of it, and this is the black soldier fly, etc., is that we can produce oil from these processes that would save millions of hectares and acres of palm forests or natural forests down in Southeast Asia. So if we think differently and we think a little bit crazy and mad, we can make huge changes to the whole sanitation environment. And we, following the path of the TBC, we're saying that this is a circular economy. Just don't look at it, don't look at sanitation as a charitable and a feel-good kind of activity. I criticize some of the water aid guys, etc., that come and they think they're on a huge, what you would call religious crusade on bringing solutions into Africa, etc. You got to think more than that. There's a huge market, there's a huge potential, and there's a huge opportunity to disrupt that. So that's the idea that we're bringing around, that we can end this madness if we think out of the box. Thank you. I think that was 10 minutes.
Well, thanks a lot, Jay. I'm sure you were. We'd like to be mad with you a little bit. So this was really a great intervention. So key questions. We have maybe space for 2 questions. Yes and yes. Okay, 2 ladies there at the back.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really enlightening, and I can see you have really a laboratory of ideas in South Africa. I have a question when you say we. Are you speaking on behalf of the government? How much is the government supporting your ideas and the solution, or is it also the private sector? I would like to know a little bit more about this.
Okay, you need to show me one government that supports you, but anyway, that's No, look, when I talk about we, it's a bigger family of researchers, partners. I mean, it's a big community. But in South Africa, you hear about sanitation markets. It's become a rhetoric of the World Bank, creating markets for poor people, etc. And, I've worked for 50 years with water supply providers. I see a lot of them come and give presentations on huge donor funding they get, etc. That is not the right market. Okay, the right market is working with people outside the sector. So working with Treasury, working with trade and industry. They are better instigators of shifting technology and rolling out technology. So when I say we, in South Africa, looking at that process, we actually approached our own trade and industry. We didn't go to the water supply guys because we know exactly how they behave. And we created an industrial platform around off-the-grid sanitation. They bought into it, understanding that it's a climate change issue, it's a green energy issue, it's a service delivery issue, it's 5 million VIPs issue as well. And we made the case to them. So they bought into it, and they're going to put in something like about $1 billion to create the next generation of technologies or industry that would go off the grid. That's the kind of approach we're using. So we is a big family, and yes, we do work with government. Well, government watches us working on their behalf, put it that way.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jay. We have the other lady at the back, yes.
Yeah, thank you for the inspiring presentation. You do seem to be here in body and in spirit. My question is, you have provided a number of solutions, and I would be interested in the energy intensity of those solutions. And then the second question is actually, are we really missing the technologies, or are we missing the creation of the market for those technologies?
There's 2 ways to answer that. The new approaches that we are addressing technologies is that we're approaching them and the innovation from a market perspective. So, it's like toothpaste. You don't make toothpaste and then you ask how many people's teeth are going to be white, etc. You start with a market to say, I know so many people's teeth are yellow and I'm going to tackle it, etc. So it's the first time in sanitation we're designing systems, okay, in preparedness for a market. Okay, so that's the, from my own experience, and I'm not criticizing the gate system, etc. Gates through the whole sort of dices on the floor. What I'm seeing is that the big game changes are going to come from thermal systems, and the energy intensive. Okay, so incineration, heating, dehydration, etc. All the future quick win solutions, microwave, you can put it, and they're all energy intensive. But not that large amount of energy, because with a lot of smart ways of stealing and hybridizing experiences from the industrial sector. The FMCG industry has huge processes, they have huge energy intensive, and they're dealing with carbon. Most of their processes are carbon management. And we haven't gleaned from that experience. So we're starting to see that you can get solar-driven systems with low energy intensity that can treat human wastes in about 30 minutes, okay, completely without producing sludges, etc. In fact, as I speak, the first, I won't even call it prototype, the first units are reaching South Africa now for some engineering testing. So we want to put it into some communities to really get it pressure tested. But I know I've been working with them for 2 years, they work. From a process-wise, they work. But human behavior is something I cannot predict. If it's not white, I abuse it. If it sticks, I abuse it. So we're trying all of the stuff to create non-stick coatings and all sorts of stuff in trying to eliminate those kind of challenges. But the future, in my calculation, come to my session, 2 years, 3 years, we'll all be queuing up for the new iPad in your toilet kind of thing. It's going to be the game changer.
Okay, so really, I see that we have the new Steve Jobs of sanitation, no? Okay.
I'm nearly there.
Creative, provocative, but with real solutions that serve everybody.
I've ordered my red Ferrari.
Yeah, okay. I hope you realize you need to go to his session. No? So thanks a lot, Jay. That was really inspiring, provocative, refreshing as well.
Yeah.
We need this in such a discussion. Thanks a lot, Jay.
Thank
a big applause to Jay. So I would like to introduce as well now another person that is also very creative, innovative, and that is well known to the sector. And it's Christian Zurbrugg, who is actually, as you all know, a member of the EWAC Directorate and group leader of the solid waste management. So again, a lot of innovation, Christian. So much so that when I think about solid waste, I want to see you. You're the first one that I'm thinking of when we think about that. So looking forward to hearing your presentation. You have 10 minutes.
Thanks very much, Francois. So I come from the solid waste sector, and my task was kind of to make this link to sanitation. And I think many of you probably already realize that there are a lot of links. And if you know some technology, if you think about technologies, you often see those links. And often, and one of my messages, and I'll say it right now, is that compared to sanitation, solid waste is simple, right? Because the major difference that we have is we don't have such high risks. We don't have pathogens, really, in solid waste. We might have some flying toilets, things like that. We have to think about that. But generally, the main body of solid waste, especially when we're thinking about the organic fractions, is free from pathogens. I'd just like to show you some thoughts that I've been having, some experiences, and maybe highlight with a few examples of technologies, of cases, to kind of show what potentials and where really the challenges are. And I'm not missionarying for resource recovery. I think there's a lot of potential in resource recovery to kind of strengthen the sector, but there are still a lot of questions and a lot of challenges. So not resource recovery for the sake of resource recovery, but only when it makes sense. You might have seen this diagram, you remember this diagram, these functional elements from the compendium. I kind of redesigned it and I put the solid waste system instead of the sanitation system, and I took the system template, as we call it. Now it's called segregated organic waste management, as an example. And what my point is here, that you'll see very kind of a lot of parallels to the sanitation system. So we have a reuse, we have a reuse sector, we have certain value propositions, we have certain products which we can produce from waste, right? And if we think from a design engineering, so we start from the back typically in resource recovery, we say, okay, what product do we want to make which has a certain market, and how can we make that product? And I listed a few products that we can make from organic waste, and we know how to do these, right? And we have the technologies to do these. So if we look at the source of waste, what we have is inorganics, organic solid waste, and then we have that user interface, which, if we want to make use of this organic fraction, is household segregation. We can say we can sort afterwards, but that creates a lot of problems. And that, of course, then starts getting social, right? Because there we need behavior change, we need involvement of the people that generate the waste to actually make sure that that happens. And then once we have organic waste, I put the organics, but I didn't follow up on the inorganics. Let's just look at the organic fraction. So we have some form of transport, human or motorized transport, which is waste collection, segregated waste collection. And then we have maybe, hopefully, some proven treatment options at a larger scale, which can then produce these products. So that would be compost, that's the larvae, for instance, that Jay just showed. That's the worms from vermicomposting. That can be char or that can be biogas in terms of energy source or animal feed or fertilizer for crops. Of course, there's not only this element of larger scale, there's also this element of user scale, so treatment options at household scale. And really then the question is, and you all know this, maybe you compost at home, and that's household scale, right? That's household scale organic waste recovery. But the question always is, do you have the ability to do that at household scale? And is it worth doing it? Do you feel it's worth doing that, making that effort, if you know how to do it and you feel you're able to do it, to really do it? And that might not necessarily be a cost calculation at that level, because it might be really more opportunity costs. You have a garden, then you're interested in making compost because you use it in the garden, right? And you don't really think about, okay, how much is the fertilizer costing? How much am I saving in fertilizer? That's not really what you do. But it's more kind of a perception and an opportunity cost. Actually, these questions are the same at that scale, but they're on a bit different level. It's also, do we have the ability? Do we have the skills? Do we have the technologies to actually do that? And is it worth the effort? And here, worth the effort, of course, is more than the business approach. Does it make sense in terms of costs to make that special effort in not only making wastewater treatment, for instance, but making wastewater treatment and from the sludge making char because we want to sell the char, right? So it's again, is that additional effort that you're making, is it worth it? Because it might save costs, or is it just creating more costs? And so that's really the questions that we have to answer. And then, of course, the last question is, okay, how can we now link this system to toilet waste? And I put here toilet waste. I didn't put kind of sanitation waste because I think the excreta part, of course, is interesting. The whole wastewater flow, the gray water flow, I think is a bit more easier, or the gray water flow specifically is a bit more easier to manage at that point. We recently made this review from the organic waste, and what you see here is actually the whole variation of technologies or processes to reach certain end uses. The end uses are below. The products are in the middle that we can produce, and then we made these categories of, I would say, treatment processes or technologies. So you see here, actually the direct use is something which is the easiest to do, is the lowest cost, but has the highest risk, right? And then there's the one of biological treatment, composting, vermicomposting, black soldier flies, and then we have all the kind of more of the physical chemical, which often lead to more the energy and the thermal products. It can get very complicated. And if you look in detail, some of them are very specific, like transesterification to make glycerol. And there, if you look into these technologies, what you find out is that they really only work with very specific types of feedstock, right? They don't deal with our typical problems that we're all facing, household solid waste. They like take, okay, some fats from some old oil from some specific industries. That's worth it. Then you can make glycerol from that. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is that often when we do these highly specialized resource recovery, we're actually cherry picking. And those are the things that make sense. But we're not solving the problem of our basic problem of solid waste management and sanitation, especially if not for those which are not serviced or are the most difficult to service. Then it's rather those fractions which are already serviced where we can easily access waste. I try to show this here. The choice by market demand. So we have different products. We have different treatment technologies. These are the ones I just put up. I'm sure there are many more. And what I also try to show here is that there are a lot of early co-treatments. Co-composting was shown before. Co-digestion for making biogas. Briquetting, pelletizing, char production. And then, of course, BSF processing and vermicomposting. But still, what we shouldn't underestimate is waste sourcing. Because again, what goes in influences the quality of what goes out. And I would like to show this with two examples of technologies. So here the problem is, what is the transport? How do we get it to the market? What is the price? Can we produce in a consistent quality and quantity? Because that's what the market needs. Otherwise, they can't rely on you as a production unit. Availability of the technology, the cost of the technology, the skills and ability, and the maturity in a way of the technology, or is it still in a kind of a pilot trial phase? And I think that's what we discussed before. Are we already at that technology level where we know enough and we can start doing cost evaluations? Or are we still working at the technology level like Jay showed, where we really need some fundamental knowledge on how the technology works and how it can process? And then, of course, at the source, we have aspects of behavior, incentives. Why should the people actually separate? What's in it for them? You know, is the waste accessible? Is it a good enough quality? Okay, my first example is BSF treatment, so black soldier flies. So actually what we're doing is, we always talk about these larvae, but really what we're actually doing with the treatment process, we're producing some digestate, or the residue after the larvae have fed on it. So that's something like a compost. From that we can even make char. So we have actually this whole kind of animal feed, fertilizer, potential energy product. We all have it there. That's something we've been working on in Indonesia. That is a plant in operation, 1 ton per day. I would say not that big, but not a pilot anymore, where we have a nursery where we breed the flies, and then we have a treatment unit. Again, what's the kind of critical issues? Of course, one aspect is quality control. How can we ensure that the larvae have a consistent quality? Because if we want to reach that market, we need to ensure that. And that means we need to look at what the source is. And yes, and another one is the multiple revenue streams. We really need what our experience shows, that we need a revenue stream that comes from waste processing of the task of processing waste, and then we have a revenue stream from selling the products. We had this recent workshop, and it really comes out that we can often, very few cases can actually get all their revenues only from the sales of products. In those cases where they do that, they're cherry picking. They're only taking certain fractions. Okay, I have to speed up. Just some examples. That's the pilot, that's the facility, how it looks like. We recently published an operational guideline. We also have a video that shows how to do it. And I think that's our mandate, to transfer those skills, those aspects of ability. And then another example that I'd like to show you is FS treatment, the SEEK project in Uganda, where we made fuel. And without making a long story short, the calorific value of this sludge, although the technology works, is not great at all. And why is that? It's because the source is rubbish. I mean, it's also rubbish, yeah, it's sludge, but it's full of sand. And you can burn sand and you'll have a lot of ash, but that has no calorific value. So suddenly you're faced with a technology that works, but your source is not a good quality, And that comes from the sanitation facilities in the households, which then influences your product. So suddenly you're faced with a problem at the source. And you really need to always kind of match that in your head and not kind of say, okay, it's not a one-way process, it's an interactive process. Okay, let me finalize that with some conclusions. And these are also conclusions that came up in a workshop on circular economy in WASH that we had in Switzerland recently. And those, I would say, are the ones that I kind of set up in different groups. Technology. So we have to think around products, but we have to ensure quality of products. And we should not underestimate waste sourcing. We really most often need W revenue streams. We really need to increase cost effectiveness. We should think about, are we cherry picking or are we impacting on public health issues? And if we really want to impact on public health issues, sorry, there's a typo there, we really need to focus on W revenue streams because the other doesn't work. And then to follow up on the first presentation, we also need to think about environmental sustainability. What is the carbon footprint of what we're doing? Does it make sense? How does it compare with other technologies? Actually, if you allow me, open defecation is most carbon neutral, right? But okay, that's the climate discussion, but that's not a discussion we should follow up on, right? So I think we need to really think about that as well. What kind of incentive-based systems? And I think the last is following up on PI. You know, how can we really communicate these examples with evidence? And that's evidence on technology, but also as evidence on cost aspects and kind of implementation units. And I think that's what we really need to communicate. And that I already said at the beginning.
Thanks a lot, Christian. And just a big hand because really we can see the link between sanitation and solid waste very clearly. A lot of similarities. The big thing about the sourcing, and if you don't get the story right, you've got the whole story going wrong, actually, at the beginning. But one thing maybe I would like to make sure, this story we're talking about is not only for Indonesia, not only for Zambia, it's also for Sweden, it's also for UK. And Sweden is working a lot, is developing this type of approach. So, well, you know that. You've been visiting some of the Swedish new urban development following all these principles. So a few questions, please. Yes, Christophe and Antoinette.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris, for this very interesting presentation. I think it's very interesting to show the link between sanitation and solid waste management and also to highlight the risk. I suggest to add another level of risk. We speak about sanitation, about solid waste. It could be interesting also to think which linking with cattle excretors, because we know that, for example, for biogas, we do often the link and the mix of the two. I think it could be also interesting to do the same exercise and to analyze also the risk.
Mm-hmm. We take the second question so that
I don't think that was a question. That was a statement.
Okay, a statement. But you may want to react.
Yeah, no, I think I agree.
Okay, all right. Good. Antoinette.
Thank you, Chris. I really liked your presentation. And to echo what Elisabeth said, I really like the tone of the discussion on reuse, because I think it puts in realism. It's not about being against or in favor of reuse, but thinking about actually how can we ground it and also focus on the issues that are happening in at scale. What I was thinking is what would help, because in the sector there's a lot of overheated aspirations or expectations from reuse, for example, in terms of the revenues that you would get out of it. And then if it isn't fully cost recovery, then people think then they're disappointed. Mm-hmm. Whereas actually that is unnecessary. Mm-hmm. If they cover 50% of their cost with reuse, they should already be quite happy. And that's a good thing. So how can we share such benchmarks about for example, the effectiveness, for example, the cost recovery, more wider to get a degree of realism in the discussion on reuse.
My point there is we need evidence. We don't have that evidence at the moment. You know, now from solid waste management, I can tell you that doing BSF with organic waste, I'm not sure if it actually, and selling the larvae, I'm not sure if it still costs more than transporting the waste and building a sanitary landfill. I don't know that. I think so because I implicitly include all the externalities, but a government usually doesn't, I mean, it's more, that's kind of a bigger discussion, right? And that's a more complicated discussion. If we could actually show that it saves cost, and I'm not saying cost recovery, I'm saying saving costs as the convention, I mean, then we're already far ahead. But even that, we have some cases. I think there are a few cases. We know those cases. You know, there are businesses that are operating typically with double revenue sources, and they're operating well. So there are examples, but actually documenting those examples, communicating those examples, I think that's still that's a gap.
Okay. Well, okay. The very last one. No. Yeah, we have too many questions. One, but please, very short, a quick, direct answer. Question. And also a quick answer from your side.
It's asking you to expand. So are you looking at the externalities? Because that was my question. You talked about cost a lot, which is important. But are you looking at that as an argument to use?
Yes. For instance, for BSF, I wouldn't say externalities, but for instance, what we looked at is the carbon footprint, which is typically something where you can argue well with municipal officers, because that's kind of on a high priority level. And we had the presentation before, you know, climate change, climate mitigation, that is. But I wouldn't say on the externalities, for instance, on social impact, on economic development, on tourism, those aspects, no, we're not covering those yet.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian. A big hand to Christian. It was really interesting.
So we're coming to our last presentation, and we're already into our coffee break, unfortunately. But the good news is that there's a lot of interest in these topics, especially for the treatment. So a reminder to go back behind the gray line. I have the pleasure to introduce to you Erik Kerman. Erik, please welcome. Erik, he is the Urban Water Management Group. He's heading the Urban Water Management Group at the Research Institute of Sweden, RISE. So we are going back to Europe for a few minutes. And please, the floor is yours, Erik.
Thank you very much. Erik Kerman is actually my surname. It's almost like the chairman, but not exactly the same. I hope you will be brave enough for another 10 minutes here. And there was mentioned here the Swedish urban example, and that's actually most what I'm going to speak about. Some insights about them, and referring to a report which has this English title, but unfortunately this is in Swedish, so I hope you have a good Swedish, all of you, so you can read this. I did this work together with two scientists from Lund, sanitary engineering, and two people from the water utilities of Helsingborg, Marinette and Sofia. So I will come back to why Helsingborg is important here. Helsingborg is a city in the south of Sweden. It's around 100,000 inhabitants, and they are rebuilding an area in the very center part of Helsingborg called H+, where it has been a former harbor and industrial area, and they are going to build quite a lot of apartments there. And the first spot of it is 300 apartments, and there they decided to build a separated system with black water systems. and it's soon going to be built, this system. And some details about it. They will have vacuum systems for black water, and it will be transported collectively, so it's a combination of vacuum and low pressure system for transporting this black water to a tank, collection tank, which will be situated very close to this area where the wastewater treatment plant is also. And they will also have food waste grinders in their kitchens, so there will be a separate stream of wastewater from food waste, also separate transported and collected in a tank. And finally, there will be grey water from showers and washes and so on. And the grey water will also be handled separately and in a separate pipe. And they have a test bed, and they have financed a test bed where they're going to work. They will have these big tanks where they collect these 3 substrates, and they will test different things, the different processes to extract or how to use and treat these different streams in the near future. So that's Helsingborg with a very urban example. We have also we also studied a more existing example. Maybe you have had study visits there. If you've been to Sweden and Stockholm area before, this is south of Stockholm, Södertälje, where we have a hygienization facility for black water from individual houses where they have vacuum to tank systems. So there's collections with trucks and transported to this facility where they have liquid composting combined with urea hygienization. And storage, this is on the farmland, and they spread this substrate on the farmlands. And they have had like 5 years of good good operation, so it's a good example. But still, it's a challenge. What I thought is not that the big challenge is not to run this facility. The problem is to the challenge is actually to force the house owners to install these vacuum systems to get more of these good systems. A third example, which is in this report, is from Västerås. It's west of Stockholm, city in around 130,000 persons, I think. There is an area under transition. It's formerly a holiday camp called Munga, where there are 279 houses, and they had individual systems, but they are now building a collective system, a municipal system, where they will have source separation, black water and grey water. And the grey water will be treated locally with soil filters, and the black water will be collected in a tank and transported to the agriculture close by for hygienization and used as a fertilizer. So this has actually been built. So this was in January when I was there. It was just started. So in 1 year or so, this system will be up and running. Yeah, technical details for the engineers. Low pressure systems here, not vacuum systems, so we will got more water in the flushes here. It's more like conventional toilets, but separated black water and grey water. And actually, they have water supply from the city in a pipe here, so there will be a totally central system for water supply. Okay, and we looked about experience. This project was to support these municipalities and also other municipalities who were planning to introduce separated systems. So we looked at experiences, mostly from other countries in Europe, like Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Switzerland, So we supported these municipalities with some general information about different technical parts. We saw that from the transport systems that kitchen waste disposal is a well-established technology. So they work well, but they are not used. In most of these examples, we need as little amount of water as possible. So that's a challenge, to decrease the water use in this kind of system. The gravity systems for black water is only a few experiences, but positive so far. Also here, there is a balance, of course. You need water for these systems to work with the gravity, but you want as small amount of water as possible, of course, for the reuse part, and when you collect them in tanks and so on. Vacuum systems, we had a number of problematic things what we saw in the past, but we have seen that the new systems work quite good. And about the treatment and recovery processes in source separation systems, we see that there is not so much examples of digestion. I think that there is a great potential. Liquid composting is a little bit more well known, at least in the Nordic countries. It's quite sensitive, but it works, and it works fairly good in Surridge together with the urea hygienization. We have good examples of stew white production and only a few examples of membrane technology used, and seems promising anyhow. So what we also did a lot in this work was to do some economic analysis. And what we did with, this is Helsingborg, and they needed some proofs that the separated system for H+ wouldn't be an economical crisis for the municipality. And that's what you can look at when you compare the bars 1 and 2 from the left. So we saw that looking at the whole city, and we have, if we would build separating system for around 10% of the inhabitants, then it will not cause so much extra costs actually for the municipality as a whole. And then we have the third bar showing the costs of a separated system, just comparing purely separated system. And then you can see that separated system is around calculating all of these different stakeholders. You can see that it's around 20% more expensive than a conventional system. And we can also see here that most of the costs is on the household part actually. So the equipments within the houses is the biggest cost. So the water utilities has been very afraid of the cost for them, but we saw that the extra costs for them is not actually so very large in the Helsingborg case. There are also some, of course, benefits from separated system. We get good nutrients and more energy maybe, and then we can get some extra incomes from the systems, but it's very small amount of money comparing to the costs on the last slide. Okay, so our conclusions from this study is that we need to work more with the planning and implementation issues. Some regulations are working against separated systems. There needs some harmonization of these policies and regulations. We need a better involvement from the agriculture, the actual end users of the products, to have their aspects of how these products should be. And also we need a better educated building sector because they know nothing about this system actually. And when we go into more existing houses like in Västerås, we need a very good communication strategy with the house owners if they should get these systems. So as I mentioned before, we have we calculated that we had around 20% more costs for the separator system in Helsingborg, but that's quite good conditions there. Could be more costly in other parts, of course. And of course, we see that there is a lot of potential in the separated system, and we think there is good reasons to still work with this. And we actually have an ongoing project called Macro now, where we still support these municipalities and also work with other municipalities who are interested in this. And I work together with Jennifer McConville and Elisabeth Kvarnström in this project, for instance, maybe some other in this room. So if you know them, you can also ask them about that project. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric. A quick question from Claudia? Or who was raising the hand? Yeah, Claudia. Okay. The question is yours.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm wondering about the urine diversion systems. You have not mentioned them. Is there still any existing? I know that Gustavsberg is not producing anymore. I think the flush toilet.
Yeah,
system, right?
I don't think there are any urine diversion flush toilets on the market anymore, unfortunately.
Do you have an idea why?
Yeah, there was, I think we have a dead market actually, because we had examples and we have still some up and running systems in Stockholm, but there was some not so good experience from them, and I think it's very sad because it's things that could have been improved very easily. So at this stage, the Blackwater system is what the municipalities are interested in. But we are writing a little bit about urine diversion as well in this report, but not yeah. So.
Excellent, thank you. Eric, so resource recovery from sanitary systems, I think this is what Roland mentioned before. It's true that you are standing in here for, yes, in Europe we are also looking back at opportunities for resource recovery. It's not only something we want to do in Durban, South Africa. And this has been this session. Thank you very much. Closing.